And we are live, broadcasting from FEMA Region 10. This is John Wilkinson for the Council of Google+. The council is now in session. I am broadcasting from Washington State, and along with us we have Vincent Lasson. And go ahead and announce yourself and your FEMA region.
Hey, I'm Vincent Lasson. I'm from unknown parts within FEMA Region 4.
I'm Vincent, otherwise known as the Meows Cat, transmitting live from FEMA Region 5.
I'm Metal Minister, and I am currently coming to you from FEMA Region Deuce.
And this is Brian Forbes, and I am transmitting from FEMA Region 7.
Excellent. We have also a special guest today of a gentleman named Prince Asbel. Can we use your real name also, or should we want to go ahead and
just use my real first name? That's
Matt,
fine. Just don't give my full real name out there,
Sure.
just for safety purposes.
Okay. Well, then we'll just call you Matt occasionally, or maybe Prince Asbel. We'll just kind of go back and forth, maybe.
That works.
So, anyways, tonight, before we get going, I want to go ahead and make a warning to the listeners of the podcast. Is tonight is going to be a discussion about adult themes. We're going to be talking about pornography. There's going to be some areas that we might be touching on that could be very much adult-like. So we don't want to offend you or embarrass your kids or anything of that nature. So if it's something that you are leery of broadcasting or listening to, I would say you might want to just listen to him only in your earbuds. So anyways, so there will be adult concepts and topics to be discussed, possibly. I don't know how detailed we're going to get, but we're going to try to be as delicate as possible and as Christian as possible when it comes to this topic. So with that in mind, I guess I don't know the whole story as far as the background goes, but I do know that Matt, or Prince Asbel, had a discussion with one of the Bible Thumping Wingnut Network's theology gals, Colleen, I believe. And basically what happened was there was a topic that they shared about pornography and how it affects. So I'll go ahead and just pass the ball over to you, Matt, and just kind of give us a refresh of what happened and what exactly was the issue / argument, I guess.
Sure. Let me introduce myself. Yes, I am Matt, Prince Asbel on YouTube, and I'm a Reformed Baptist Christian in West Virginia. What happened is I listened to Theology Gals episode 22. It had to do with when your husband looks at pornography, and they had a woman by the name of BTWN on their show to promote a book of hers by basically the same name. And I listened to that podcast, and I took dozens of notes, and I found so many problems in there that I decided somebody, and I guess it may as well have been me, needed to voice their objections to the people who listen to the Bible Thumping Wingnut Network. It's one thing for me to make a video of my own making critical analysis of it, but I wanted to actually reach the Bible Thumping Wingnut audience myself. And so I've talked with the council, we talked in chat, and we had a conversation, and they agreed to have me on, and so that I could lay out my objections publicly and for me to answer any objections or counter arguments they have to my position. So that's why I'm here.
So why don't you lay out your objections, your position, etc.
Sure. I've got a couple of quotes. I went ahead and printed them off from the episode. About 26 minutes and 49 seconds into the episode 22 of Theology Gals, Colleen asked BTWN, "Can you just talk to the women out there who are feeling like maybe I wasn't having sex enough with my husband and that's why he did it, or they're blaming themselves in some way?" And BTWN responded, she said, "I think that is the number one feeling that a woman has when she finds out, is that I must not have been enough. I must not have been appealing enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not attractive enough. I'm not performing well enough in the bedroom or often enough or whatever. I'm just not enough. And I can't say strongly enough that this is not your fault. This is absolutely not your fault. In the end, we are all responsible for ourselves and how we walk in obedience to God's word, or we don't. And we can't control anyone else's choices but our own. We certainly can't control our husband's choices. And this has nothing to do with the size of her jeans or her bra size or how often she's being intimate. I guess it's a good thing you went ahead and said, we're going to try and be delicate here. And we're trying. But yeah, that's what she said. And I take extreme exception to that. This idea that women bear no responsibility for their husbands looking at porn. It's such a well-known issue that men struggle to get sex in our society, even Christian men. It's a well-known phenomenon. Even a feminist Christian author, Shayla Gregoire, she had to write a book about it, that wives persistently refuse to have sex with their husbands. It's very common. It's widespread. And to say then that these men who, probably caught looking at pornography, that it's all their fault and none of the responsibility lays on the wife is simply unbiblical. And I would base that primarily on 1 Corinthians chapter 7, but I've got other verses here that we could use to go over that to demonstrate that that is the case.
Why don't you lay out your biblical case?
All right, well, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, let me pull it up here. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 will begin. Well, I'll read off the first few verses. Well, I'll try to be brief. Because of the temptation, we'll start in verse 2. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now, these passages are laying out the fact that if you aren't having sex, then you are vulnerable to temptation to sexual sin. And in the case of a Christian marriage with a husband and a wife, that's their responsibility to each other. They should have sex with each other, and they should not deprive each other. And if they do deprive each other, they're leaving themselves open to temptation, in this case, specifically from the devil himself. And what you find then is that if, taking that into account, when you also recognize the reality of frigid wives, even within the Christian church, then it's very obvious to understand that when people like Vicky T.D. say that the wife has no responsibility for her husband looking at porn, that she's just simply wrong, just from 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We can delve deeper into that, but I don't want to talk too long before I start boring people. So does anybody have a question about what I said about 1 Corinthians 7? Or
Well, real quick, if you don't mind, Metal. So what is, and I'm trying to, I've watched some of your videos, so I'm familiar with your position. Sorry for the cat in the background. He thinks he needs to go outside right this minute. In one of your videos, you said that in 1 Corinthians 7, 2 through 5, and I say 2 through 5 because you've left off 1 in what you just read. Paul is saying that because of lack of control over our sex drives, we should marry and have sex.
That's right.
Is that your position?
That's correct.
That this is what this is saying.
Yes.
Okay. And so you maintain that every person that exists has no control of their sex drive.
No, the scripture does talk about people who have control over it, but the people who obviously do not have control over it, who I think it's undisputable that they outnumber the people who can control it and are able to live without being married. There are people that can do that, but the vast majority of humankind cannot. And so, yeah, I don't hold that everybody has to get married to have sex, but obviously those who need to must.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to actually add really quickly is, in particular, that her statement, I agree, is a little bit more generalized than I would say. It's a little bit too blanket of a statement, but I wouldn't say that it negates all possibilities. So I wouldn't necessarily condemn everything that she's saying, particularly because, and this is something that I have a fuzzy memory of, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, it might be something that Andrew Rappaport might have brought up at some point in time in the past. But there have actually been studies that have shown that I mean, not simply just the viewing of porn, but like getting to a porn addiction is not always or necessarily the result of having a lack of sex. So that may also be something you want to take into consideration.
Do you want me to just respond to that?
Possibly. I was just kind of throwing that out there as a...
Okay. I prefer we stuck with the scriptures. These just throwing out the existence of studies. I mean, there are studies that prove things both ways on any kind of issue. So I would have to look at it and get back to you on that. But the Bible, the 1 Corinthians 7, I think a temptation to porn could, I mean, I think that would qualify under temptation to sexual sin from Satan. And in 1 Corinthians 7, it says you do not deprive. And if you do deprive, it's maybe only for a limited time. And then you come together again, because if you don't, well, you're vulnerable to temptation. So that verse says you must have sex. It does not say that anything that there's some sexual desire out there that this won't cure, that it's not even part of the discussion.
All right.
If there is a verse to that effect, I'd like to see it.
What was it? So what's the, you said, repeat the last like two sentences you said, sorry.
If there is a verse that says that porn, that certain sexual temptations have nothing to do with the lack of sex, I'd like to see it. I'd like to see where that verse is. It's not necessarily that I disagree, but again, we're talking about studies I haven't even seen, so maybe we should move on to another point.
I mean, I would submit that when Jesus says that out of a man's heart comes all sort of immoralities, I think that pretty much seals it. I mean, it's not for a lack of sex. It's because his heart wants to do what his heart wants to do.
Oh, yeah, I understand that, but what does that mean about 1 Corinthians 7? Is 1 Corinthians 7 contradicting that other passage?
Well, no, I don't think so at all. I think Paul is.
I mean, it's a rhetorical question.
But I'm going to answer it actually.
Okay.
Because I don't think it is. I think Paul is actually answering a question that the Corinthians have asked him about or written to him about. Paul was dealing with ascetics in Corinth. He was dealing with people that in 1 Corinthians 7:1, he says, "Now concerning the matters about which you wrote," and there's this phrase, "It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman." That's an ascetic phrase, and so he's responding to that. He's not saying you must do this. In fact, verse 2, it's translated in the ESV. Each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give. It's not must.
What do you think should means? That's a moral term. That means you should do this, not
so,
that.
So my question to you is, in 1 Corinthians 7:38, when Paul says that the one who refrains from marriage will do better, and actually he recommends that we stay unmarried, isn't this contradicting this moral imperative that you seem to see in these?
No, because in the preceding two verses, he talks about a man who has his desire under control, and so we're not talking about people who have an unusual ability to have tamed their sexual desire to the point where they can go without a husband or a wife. It's that's the element that comes right before it that would answer your question about verse 38.
Just a quick question for my own clarification. Is that not also the area where Paul says that the ability to control it is a gift from God?
I don't remember reading that in 7.
I'm
wrong.
I think it's that may be a different place.
it might be.
I don't remember
shocked
reading that
it,
today.
but I don't see it.
Yeah, I think you're referring to when Paul says, you know, I wish that others could be like me and remain single. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, that is in 7, yes.
That's what I was meaning.
Well, we're right, but we aren't like him, so it's that's that wouldn't he would wish they'd be out there, but since we are not like him, then we have these instructions from single to marriage, from single people to married people. If you're single, get married, and when you're married, do this.
No. He says if you're single, stay single. If you're married,
no,
stay
in
married.
1 Corinthians 7, it says, because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband.
All right. 1 Corinthians 7:32. I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife. And his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. So there it seems that he's saying that it's better to remain single, and that when you become married, you actually don't do things for the Lord because you now have a family to take care of.
Well, I'm not sure why you guys would bring this up, because I'm not arguing that a person, I've never proposed that a person who is able to go unmarried and keep his sex drive in check, that he therefore should marry. Paul obviously recommends that, you know, you should stay single. But I've never proposed that that's the case. It's because of people who can't do that.
But in your video, you did say all men need sex, and so Paul says, get married. And so the premise is all men need to get married because all men need sex.
I'd say all men except for a few small, tiny handful of out of the entire population is a appropriate use of the word all. I don't. That's again. This isn't even where the controversy was about this whole episode in the first place. The controversy had to do with saying that it was the wife's responsibility for her husband being addicted to porn. These are side issues you guys are bringing up.
Well, I'm actually bringing it up because I think that you've pulled this section of scripture out of context to the greater context of what Paul's addressing, and so.
Well, okay, so what about the verses that you quoted? What about the verse? What is it about the verses you just quoted that demonstrated it's not the wife's responsibility if her husband succumbs to that temptation?
I'm not addressing that right now.
Well,
I'll definitely get to that. So yeah, as you did say, there was a controversy.
That is the controversy. I mean, it's not just limited to Facebook. That's the way it is across the board in almost any time you discuss this issue.
Correct. And so your premise is that if a man succumbs to porn, that the wife shares the blame.
More specifically, it's that if a man is stuck in a marriage with a frigid wife and she does not give him sex, and she persistently refuses to do so, then yes, she does bear some of the blame.
And one thing I want to bring up really quickly, just so that, because since we don't have any theology gals in here.
I wish we did. I'd love for them to give me questions too.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, and that's also something else that I wanted to bring up, that, you know, if any of them are listening and want to join, they are more than welcome to. But I wanted to bring up that that's, I think, one of the things that I was kind of trying to get to is when I was saying that her statement was a little bit too general. Because again, if you get to the point where it's like, okay, well, if the wife isn't following the verses that you brought up, then she may bear some of the reason behind it. But I hopefully I'm not getting off too much of the topic with this next question that I have, and it actually kind of goes to what Brian was bringing up. But will a man who is getting enough conjugal rights from his wife will he never be tempted by porn?
I'd say the temptation would be a lot less frequent. Certainly, if she has sex with him whenever he wants,
Oh yeah,
the temptation could certainly it could certainly come, but it would be much easier to resist. There are unmarried men who have made the valiant attempts to fight their porn addiction and have done so for months. I mean, not a huge many months, I don't think, but and that was with them not getting sex at all. So in the context of specifically a Christian marriage with a Christian husband and a Christian wife, and she's having sex with him whenever he wants, I'd say the temptation can still come, certainly, but not nearly as frequently, and would be much easier to resist.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, no, and then what I'd say is that since you're not ruling out the possibility, that may be part of her statement, I would say, is that, there might be a man who is still receiving all those things, and she catches him looking at porn in one of those times, very rare times that he was tempted, that then in those situations that might be part, I don't know, again, I might be getting a little bit off on what specifically you're trying to talk about.
No, actually, I think this is actually right on point.
Right, you're right. And in that highly specific situation, then yes, the husband would be 100% to blame.
See, I really don't think it's a highly specific situation.
Well, it is. These are the kind of specific details that are rarely brought into the discussion.
So, so again, I am going to submit that as somebody with personal experience in this from days gone by, that early on in my marriage, I was addicted to porn, and I would have sex with my wife. We would have sex a lot. We were early in our marriage. We would have sex, I think, probably as much as I really wanted it. And I would still look at porn. I would still masturbate. And the reason why is because it was easy. It was easy for me to get my fix. I knew exactly what I wanted. I knew exactly how to keep myself from orgasming or to orgasm quicker. I knew exactly what I wanted to see. And I didn't have to depend on anybody else to get it right or wrong. And I could do it basically perfectly and get exactly what I wanted and get my dopamine hit. And so it wasn't about whether my wife wanted to have sex or not. It was completely about me being selfish and not wanting intimacy with my wife because I wanted what I wanted.
So it's would you say it would be like a control thing?
It's more of like a drug addiction. Let's say, for instance, you're a heroin user, and you could either shoot yourself up, or you could have somebody else shoot you up, and as they're shooting you up, they stop for 2 minutes because they're fumbling around or whatever. They don't really or they inject you the wrong way, right? And you don't get your fix quite the way you like it.
Okay. Assuming that what you said is true, and I could ask a couple of questions about that, because obviously I have a couple of reservations, a couple of missing details. But again, assuming all things being equal, your wife has sex with you whenever you wanted, and you went and looked at porn anyway, then yeah, you would be responsible in that situation. But that's just not the situation that I've been discussing here. I'm not discussing the situations where your wife has sex with you whenever you want. That's a rare phenomenon. There's hardly anybody who has that. How do I know? Because they have to write books about this kind of topic so that wives don't keep refusing their husband's sex. I'm talking about those situations. I mean, is there anybody here who can say, yes, if a husband wants to have sex with his wife, he doesn't want to look at porn, but his wife is frigid, she refuses to have sex with him, then she shares some of the blame. Can any of you guys say that? I can say the opposite. I can say that in the situations you described, Brian, that yeah, the man is 100% it is 100% to blame. Now, can you guys agree with me on the other end that if those conditions aren't met, that you have a frigid wife who is spurning you constantly, that if you then decide to look at porn, that's partly her fault?
I would say that she's responsible for withholding. I would not say that she's responsible for you taking an action upon yourself.
Okay, well, let me ask a question more specifically then. Is she guilty of leaving you vulnerable to temptation to Satan?
Yes, she's guilty. She's guilty of withholding, which yes,
that's not what I said. Is she guilty of leaving you vulnerable to temptation from Satan? That's what 1 Corinthians 7 says. Is that true or isn't it?
Yeah,
would that be what she was guilty of?
I would actually say that this relates, at least in part, to something I heard, and this may I don't want to go too political on this, but I've heard some people, say that. Well, again, I'm trying to keep this less political, but where there.
This is the council. We don't have to be politically correct.
Yeah, I suppose, but no, I'm just trying to keep politics out of it so we don't go off into some side track. But essentially,
okay. I got you. Yeah, I don't.
Essentially, with the way that some people can say, hey, Islam is a great thing for women because they can, choose to cover up, and how wrong is it of the West to do this, that, and the other thing. I guess what I'm to try and get to this a little bit more directly. The thing about Christianity when it comes to the sin of lust, if a woman dresses immodestly, she is sinning, but we don't blame her for the sin of the male looking at her with lust. She is guilty of her own. Well, no, she's guilty of her own sin, but he's guilty of his sin. That's what I'm saying. She is guilty of dressing immodestly. That's a sin. Yes.
I don't deny that, but the blame is shared.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I'm trying to get to.
That's the thing that's a little frustrating for me is you keep saying she's responsible for this one sin and he's responsible for that one sin. I'm not denying that, but the blame is shared.
Yes, and I'm agreeing, and that's kind of what I was going for this specific situation that you're discussing. That it is a shared thing, more often than not. Like we were saying before. I mean, there's some cases where it's often left field, where Brian was just discussing things where it's like, okay, yeah, that's completely shared, or that's completely the man's end of things. Yeah. And again, like if it's a completely and utterly frigid woman who's completely and utterly withholding a man's. Then again, I think it would still be a shared thing in that situation as well, where it's
right. But just to remind you, that's why I said one of the other things in my video is that people are adverse to even acknowledging that fact, because then it reduces the high-handed nature of why the husband sinned in that way by looking at porn, because now he didn't do it just by himself. He had somebody else. There was somebody else who was aggravating him to that state wherein he did that. And so I think if you guys agree with me on that, then I think the title of the of this whole hangout has been solved. Are men only at fault? I'd say the answer is no, and I think it's been established.
Well, again, we still I still, and again, I'm kind of always
I have a hard time with this. They share the blame, because there's two sins. There's the sin of causing one to stumble, and then there's the sin of actually doing the deed. And so, go ahead, Metal.
I was just, if I could just piggyback a little bit, unfortunately, a little bit political, which I know Vincent wasn't trying to get to, but especially in this day and age of the third wave feminism that we have seen horribly twist society's views of the roles of men and women in society and in the family and in the home. Unfortunately, we see instances of this sort of situation scenario that that I think Prince Asbel was trying to describe, where we do have, the supposedly empowered woman who uses sex like a weapon, almost. That they threaten things like withholding if you don't, do a certain thing or be a certain way.
Yes.
So I think, again, just trying to piggyback a little bit, I think that unfortunately has added more to what we see. I mean, like, you're not going to see anything like that in a biblical sense. That was not a thing, in a biblical sense. But unfortunately, in today's society, you're going to see a lot of more instances of that, today.
Well, I mean, I think in a biblical context, you would see something similar to that, except it would have been the man withholding from a woman. You see that with Onan withholding a child from, and it was this is in Genesis, where he would spill his seed, and he was punished for that because he was.
Well, even there, he wasn't withholding sex. He just didn't impregnate her. So.
And really quick, I did want to get out what I was trying to say a moment ago, just really quickly, before we move on too far. I did want to mention that and again, I'm kind of a stickler for making sure that my yes is yes and my no is no and whatnot. So I don't want to leave out, even though you were saying, hey, there is that extreme on either end of this. I don't want to say, okay, just flat out no. Well, there are instances, though rare, where it is the man's issue, and I would kind of agree with Brian, where I think it might be less rare than we might think that they're. I mean,
sorry, I don't think that it's rare that men, especially in Christian circles, do this.
Well, hang on. You don't think that it's rare that men in Christian circles do what?
I don't think it's rare that men use sex as a weapon.
Oh no, I wasn't even talking about sex as a weapon. I was just talking about the answer to the.
Yeah,
I was just talking about the answer to the are men only at fault, but yeah, no. If you want to head off in the other direction, that's fine too.
I think I'd like to chime in if that's all right. Yes. I think what you're saying in regards to, I think if you differentiate between like the actual sin, the action, and the temptation, I think there is a portion of the temptation the woman is responsible for it. Like you said, in regards to causing your brother to stumble in that respect. But here's the thing: when you bring this issue to light, what people hear is, because most often when this is brought up, it's a justification for the man's actions.
No, it's never brought up. It's brought as a defense of the man. I think it's if you're going to try and be a person like Vicky TD is and give advice to people about their marriages, you need to address both sides. You can't just simply say that the husband is only the bad guy and the only focus has to be on him doing the right thing.
I agree, but like you said, that action is completely on him.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, trail off, Cody.
But like you said, I mean, you just admitted that that action is completely on him. Did she contribute to? Did she contribute to the temptation? Yeah, maybe, but maybe in the respect that you got to understand. I mean, pornography is a whole different thing.
No, it's not a whole different thing. It's directly related. It's a direct antecedent cause. What is the point of pointing out that, well, she technically didn't put the porn in front of him or take him and sit him down in front of a computer with porn? What's the point of making a distinction between that and her putting him in the position where he'd be tempted to do that? Either way, she's still guilty. She still shares some of the blame. Well, so this distinction you're making, it does not rescue her from the idea of blame here.
I'm not saying
hold on, Cody. Let me ask. So if a man, because he had a frigid wife.
I have a question for you guys. Why even make the distinction since it doesn't rescue her from blame?
You keep using this word. Hold on. You keep using this word blame, and I don't understand. Are you saying that the man's sin is shared with the woman?
I said she is to blame. If he's the only
What
man,
is-
if he's
define
the
your
only
terms.
person,
Define what you mean by blame.
responsibility.
Okay. And so is she sharing sin? Does she have her own sin and he has his own sin, or does some of his sin transfer back to her? Yes or no?
She share blame? Look, it's both. I have said it. He is guilty of sin. She's guilty of sin. And the blame for why he went and committed another sin is shared. I don't know why we have to keep going over this. It seems a pretty simple thing to understand.
But the thing is, if, like Brian said,
the problem is that are we responsible for our own actions or not?
Yes. I keep saying that. Yes, you're responsible for yours, and she is responsible.
For mine?
Yes, in the specific situation, you want to have sex, she refuses, and you succumb to looking at porn. Yes.
So then my next question would be, if I run out and cheat on my wife because she's not having sex with me, is she to blame for me running out and cheating on her?
He's repeatedly refusing to have sex with you. Yes. That's directly stated in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. That's one of the things they'd be facing with. That's one of the issues they'd be faced with, having adultery.
Okay.
It's right there. Anybody who looks at the first 5 verses can see that.
what you mean to say is she shares blame, correct? Not she is to blame. Okay.
Well, look, like technically, it's technically literally true that she is to blame, but since it's both her and him, then you're right. I would try to use use the phrase "the blame is shared." I would use it that way.
I think
because
go ahead, Cody.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, because like we were talking about before, more often than not, the reality of it is that the man blames the woman for his sin because of that scenario rather than accepting responsibility for it. And so I think that's where it gets heated around this issue.
Now, if a man were to say he is innocent, he'd obviously be wrong because adultery is a sin. But he is picking up a man who would suggest that his wife shares responsibility, then he is right to do that because the Bible teaches it. And what you have is you'll have people like, you'll have the book named Finally Free by Heath Lambert, and he brings up the situation where a man suggests he picked up on that, and he suggested that maybe as if his wife had a more active sexual relationship with him, he would not have been tempted. And if you guys watch that video, you know Heath Lambert raked that guy over the coals. Even though it's obvious. The man is right. The 1 Corinthians 7 says, come together so that Satan may not tempt you. The guy said he might not have been tempted. That's true. It's biblically justifiable.
This line of reasoning sounds very familiar to what Adam used in the garden. God, you gave me. Do you have a refutation for what I said about the first 5 verses of 1 Corinthians chapter 7? I keep standing by that, and I've yet to see any of you say, "Hey, that interpretation was wrong." I just demonstrated that yes, if you don't, I did actually have refutation, and you just dismissed it. You wouldn't address it.
I didn't dismiss it. I rejected what you said about verses that came 20 verses down the road. But the point is that
because that's how you do biblical exegesis. Is you take an entire thought.
20 verses down?
No, you actually take an entire thought. The entire chapter 7 is about, or that entire section is about how husbands and wives, those that are given in marriage, those that are not given in marriage, etc., should or should not be in marriage or be given in marriage, if they should continue with that, if they should not continue. I didn't jump down to an unrelated thought. This is all within Paul's argumentation.
And I asked you the question, what about those verses that you cited demonstrated that the wife is not to blame if her husband succumbs to that temptation, and we moved on to another topic? You didn't answer that. And the fact is that man in that book, I'll be done in just a second. The fact is the man in that book said if his wife had a more active sexual relationship with him, he would not have been tempted. 1 Corinthians 7, it says it right there in verse 5. Yeah, verse 5. What am I talking about? Verse 5, it says, come together again so that Satan may not tempt you. It's almost a word-for-word match. And we do not have a plethora of Christian authors saying, you know what? That's right. That man was probably correct. I know of one guy who suggested that. One. Just one. That's it.
I would submit that it's because what Cody has said has been the modus operandi for very many years, that men have used that as an excuse to put all the blame on the wife. And so
I don't know about that.
Well, that's what's happened in fundamentalist circles.
I do.
That's what's happened in fundamentalist circles for as long as fundamentalism has been around. And that's what Adam did.
I don't know that they said what you said.
All you have to do,
they said none of the responsibility falls on their shoulders. I don't know that they say that.
All you have to do is seriously go to Genesis chapter 3, where Adam says, God, it's not my fault. You gave me this wife.
So
men have been doing that.
They both sinned.
And both of them tried to shift blame to another person, full blame to another person. And so again, you keep using this word blame, and my problem is that you haven't really defined what you mean by blame. Do you mean that they're sharing responsibility, that the woman is the cause?
Yes.
No, hold on, I'm not done.
Okay.
Is it that the woman's the cause? Is it that they're sharing responsibility, or is it that the man gets to shift all of his sin over to another? Because blame can be used in all three of those, and you keep using this very vague term blame, and so that's where I think people are having issues, because they hear blame and they immediately think, okay, so we're shifting blame now.
If all they hear is the word blame, then they're not listening. I keep saying shares the blame, which means both are to blame. They should not be. If anyone is still confused about it, they should not be.
And each are responsible for their respective sin. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yep. I was just adding that. That's all. No, I wasn't saying that you were. I was just, adding a period at the end of that to wrap it up.
Yeah, well, there's other things we could go over with the episode. Like Vicky TD suggested, she actually suggested something about a sexual fast. When somebody has when the wife figures out there's pornography. That was another thing that kind of it hurts my brain sometimes, because the Bible never recommends something like a sexual fast when it comes to dealing with sexual sin. Even in Proverbs, when King Solomon is talking about not being taken in by an adulterous woman, he says, take pleasure in the wife of your youth. The solution is never pray a whole bunch, read a whole bunch of the Bible, and be abstinent, and then you'll resist that temptation. No, it's always have sex with your wife. And so when I see Vicky TD also saying that if you discover him with a problem with the temptation to commit sexual sin, she says, well, maybe you should fast. That doesn't make any sense to me. And of course, she never quoted 1 Corinthians 7 in that podcast at all, just so people are aware. You can listen to it from beginning to end. That never comes up. And I think there's a very specific reason for that. So does anybody have an objection to that? Does anybody think it's a good idea to recommend a sexual fast? I
would. The first thing is, we can get to that. I don't want you to assign blame to Vicky TD.
I'm not saying I would blame her for giving some very, very bad and unscriptural marriage advice, but
that's fine. I think that it was the motives that you said that. I'm trying to quote you on the fly. I'm sorry. You said something along the lines of, I think it's very clear as to why she wouldn't bring up 1 Corinthians 7. I don't think we can.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious. Especially I searched her book. She touched on 1 Corinthians 7 once, and she quoted one verse, and then she didn't even. She then on the next page suggested that wives should talk to their husbands in this weird way that wives should ask their husbands. You know what? I'm not going to quote it on the fly. I'll just go ahead and see if I can't bring it up here.
Okay.
Here we go.
Thank you.
While you're doing that really quickly, for some odd reason, this came to mind, and I just wanted to make sure that this is also mentioned to kind of, again, maybe spread the blame around, or spread the blame around a bit. But what I'd say is that I think that, as with anything can become an idol. So I'd think to keep in mind also that an addiction to even simply sex, I would say, can also become an issue with your married partner. I mean, it's not going to, well, like any gift, I think from the Lord, it can be twisted by the enemy. So I think that in all this talk about pornography, I think there's also something that could be said for that. I'll mention, though, right away so people don't misunderstand. I'm single, virgin, and I don't struggle in the ways that I've spoken to other men how they typically do. So if I sometimes sound like I'm ignorant or speaking out of turn or anything like that, that would be the reason. So, but this is something that for some odd reason came to mind: the becoming addicted to sex with your partner. I would hope that if that is possible and if that does occur, that wouldn't become an excuse for the man or the woman, for that matter, to start looking at porn and then blame their significant other for not giving them enough of what they're addicted to or something along those lines.
I agree. Right until the last part, I would add the qualifier that I think they should point out. Let's say they're going to couples counseling because this issue has proven to be such a huge obstacle. They need outsider input. It needs to be mentioned if the wife is being frigid, that's an issue that needs to be confronted. It needs to be denounced. So yeah, I can appreciate that you guys are fighting really hard to make sure that there is no suggestion that the husband is innocent of the sin of looking at pornography, even if he looks at it. I think the only reason you guys are, and this is just my opinion, but I think the only reason you guys are constantly bringing that up is because it's very uncomfortable to suggest that the wife is at all to blame, because generally speaking, that's just not okay. I mean, if you guys saw some of the arguments that went on Facebook before this episode take place, people get so angry. It's like, how dare you suggest that kind of thing? And I'm like, listen, all I'm calling for is for the suggestion that each person shares the blame. If we're telling a couple that is having trouble in their marriage and it's due to the wife being frigid, then we need to tell the wife to stop being frigid. It's not going to get better if you just tell them, if you just crack a whip over the back of the man and tell him, just double down really hard. Don't you try to have sex more often with your wife. Don't expect that you're going to get any. You need to pray. You need to read the Bible more often and do as many things as you can, except the one thing the Bible recommends. And that is, you get in the bed and you have sex. It's really that simple.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of the point that I was trying to make, though, that I think that please ignore the Final Fantasy VII victory music in the background. That's my phone. That's kind of the point that I was trying to get at, where I think that there should be an effort to make sure that, to use a completely different sin, gluttony, that that if you are indulging in food more often than is necessary and it becomes gluttony, you shouldn't just be like, well, food is a gift of God, and I mean I get to use food whenever I want to, and it's there, and we're rich, and I can. It's not like I'm eating more food than is completely necessary, when I indulge. But so I think that I don't think that a man, and again, I apologize if I'm not the typical man, as I mentioned a few moments ago, but I'd assume that you wouldn't just go, okay, well, my sexual urges are there, and I'm just gonna completely and utterly fall victim to them whenever they pop into mind. That's something where you're like, well, you know what? I also want to keep my wife's needs in mind. And again, I'm not discussing the frigid wife in this case, you know, where it's okay. Well, it popped into my mind. Guess what, honey? You know, it's where it's something like that. You know, it's like, okay, well, it becomes an overindulgence where it's like, well, I'm just going to do this whenever and however, and I'm not going to take my wife's needs in mind during this process. And again, I'm sorry if I'm taking extremes on this, but
during the process of
all edges.
What do you mean during the process of what exactly? I'm sorry, I missed that part.
Well, essentially, if for instance, like, okay, the thought came to mind, you know, that I want sex. Okay, now I'm gonna go have sex with my wife. Okay, well, I'm not going to take her needs into account at this time.
Okay, but for the record, nobody's ever suggested that. I mean,
and like I said, that's why I said, hey, I know this is probably discussing extreme, but I want to explore all edges of something and go, okay.
I actually think that's kind of a good place to go.
I don't know how having sex with your wife on the spot is ignoring her needs, but maybe you need to provide a little more context to that.
Well, I mean,
that's kind of my point, I guess.
I think that's like, yeah. Go ahead, Vincent. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say that's kind of my point. Is that like, okay, well, where do we draw the line for the man? Of course, you know, we're going to go biblically, and we're going to go, okay, we have to take, what the Bible says that a man should do for his wife. Well, he should be willing to die for his wife for her needs, just as Christ did for the church. So there should be a point where you shouldn't, where you're going to reach a point where it's like, okay, well, my wife's needs might supersede my biological need for sex. You know, where it's like, okay, well, let me pay attention to her rather than that. And that might become something that I'd be able to do rather than going, okay, honey, well, sex popped into mind, you know, bend over.
If you wanted to say it supersedes your want to have sex, that might make sense, but you need to have sex. It's not self-sacrificial or selfless to say, I need sex right now, but I'm not going to, when the Bible says you're supposed to do that so you don't get tempted by Satan. That's not selfless to leave yourself vulnerable in that way.
Oh no, and I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm just like saying, and again, like I said, maybe I'm only looking at extremes, and maybe Brian wants to pick up from what he would.
No, actually, I do kind of want to go down that path.
I have that quote in front of me, by the way. That I was gonna say came from the book.
Are we?
It was about 1 Corinthians 7 and how it was only quoted one time. I'm looking it up on Google Books. It's cited once. And it says, it's verse 5, do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. But then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now, the next page, it says, let's see, I'm going to offer a few ideas for you and your husband to consider implementing when you are ready to be sexually intimate. Encourage your husband to verbally ask you if you'd like to be sexual with him. This will help you feel respected and will allow you the freedom to say no with honesty and without repercussion. I mean, if a woman doesn't want to try and, I mean, we're trying really hard not to give any justification to the man or impute innocence to him. But right after she quoted chapter 7, verse 5, she then says, okay, now here's this manipulative question that the wife can ask that is going to make it so that you feel more comfortable refusing to have sex with your husband. She completely missed the context of that verse. And yet she quoted on page 120 and then said what I read off to you guys on page 121. It's like she doesn't even know that the verses, or that she doesn't agree that the verses teach what I said. But then again, the passage that is the most relevant to this topic, she quotes one time in only one verse and then completely misses the boat on the very next page. That should tell us something about the quality of this book. Should we be promoting a book like that? I don't think so.
All right. So thank you for reading that quote. I got a couple more questions. So my first one is, if if a wife is frigid, do you think there might be a reason for that?
Yes.
What are some of the reasons you think that a wife might be frigid?
One would be a desire.
Somebody from, I think from the YouTube chat wanted to know, or no, it was Matt Yester. Matt Yester wanted to know what the Greek word for frigid is. But anyway.
I don't know.
It was a joke. No, it was a total joke. Anyway, so what are some of the reasons that you could think of that a wife might be frigid?
There's alienation. Perhaps the husband is not governing the relationship properly. He is not being gentle with his wife as the Bible commands. So her emotionally speaking, she doesn't. Since women are like more emotionally sexual, I think she doesn't naturally want to go ahead and say yes to him when he wants to have sex because, well, she's not really in as deep an emotional love with him as he is. That doesn't excuse her not having sex with him. I'm just throwing it out there as a reason. But another reason would be because she's a sinner like anybody else, and Christians still, to our shame, can still get pleasure out of committing sin. And then one of those sins is to disobey 1 Corinthians 7, and that's what women do. And it's a horrible sin, and it's more widespread, I think, because nobody is willing to point it out and condemn it.
Okay, so let's go back real quick, a few sentences. Okay. You said that one of the reasons why a woman might be frigid is because her husband's not meeting her needs, correct?
Well, that's a nutshell version, but yeah.
Yeah, I know it's not a word for word verbatim. Would you say that the husband is to blame for his wife's frigidity?
That's a good question. He shares the blame.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So if he shares the blame in his wife's frigidity and she shares the blame in his looking at pornography, does then the blame doubly come back on the husband for looking at pornography for also causing his wife to be frigid?
Yeah, I think you could make that argument. I'm not excusing the wife's sin in being frigid in the first.
No, I'm not either. I'm not either. I'm not either. Okay. I'm not excusing and I don't really like the term frigid. I would like to use a biblical term of withholding.
Well, there's withholding, depriving. Frigid is a very useful term. People know what it means automatically.
Can I interrupt just for a moment there? We just got in Colleen Sharp from the Theology Gals that came in.
No, wait, real quick. Is it Colleen or is it Colleen?
It's Colleen.
Colleen.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry.
Just
Thank
went
you.
out.
I thought I remembered that from the sanctification episode.
Oh, so I've been mispronouncing her name this entire time?
Well, I remembered that she pronounced it a certain way, and I couldn't remember if it was Colleen or Colleen. So I just want to make sure that we all call you the correct name.
Well, Andrew always calls me the wrong name. So.
I know.
No, actually,
well, we don't want to be like
Andrew. Call anyone or anything the right way, so
we don't want to be like Andrew.
Right.
We're not dispensational here.
He's a Yankee. Says we're
that's right.
That's right.
First off, I just want to thank you so much for joining in with us tonight. I know it was really sporadic and just right off the cuff, but I just wanted to see if you can kind of give a little insight and concerning from this podcast you had about this pornography topic. I know it's a touchy topic and all, but I just wanted to see if we can get some your point of view on this, and maybe you and Prince here, or his name is also Matt. You can kind of get.
Well, I'd like to
clarification.
Yeah, okay. I would like to say a few things before he says anything. Okay. First of all, I'm not an expert on the topic. After the issue of assurance, women writing to me on the problem of their husbands being addicted to pornography is the number 2 thing I hear from women about. And that's why we did the podcast, but I'm not an expert on it. My husband hasn't been addicted to pornography. And so we had the guest on. So I'm not sure that I can really speak to a lot of things, but I do want to say a few things because I know what Matt's arguments are. So I think there's a few things that need to be said. First of all, 90% of the women that I hear from are in their 20s. It's probably still newly married, you know, in the first 5 years. And most, if not all of them, their husbands were addicted to pornography before they got married. And I think that's a really important thing to understand. If we're going to say it's the woman's fault, and Matt, that's arguing with me, are you married?
No, I am single.
Okay. And that's the other thing, and that's what I thought. So you're not a married man who's been addicted to pornography. I actually, after you and I had our little exchange, I actually talked to a friend and her husband, and he is kind of an expert on the issue. He had the problem. The Lord saved him, and has not been addicted to pornography in 15 years, but he has helped a lot of men. And he 100% disagreed with what you said. I actually told him everything that you said. And so, and let me also say this, just so that you know, Matt, because I know you're going to bring this up. Absolutely, a woman should not deny her husband. I'm not going to get into details about that, but if a woman, I do not say to a woman whose husband is addicted to pornography, well, are you fulfilling your wifely duties? But in other instances, I would have no problem reprimanding a woman if that was a problem. But I don't think you understand the problem well enough. I think you have not been married, so you don't. So I think that's part of the problem. And
yeah, am I going to get to respond here? You said a lot of things.
No, as soon as I'm done, and you've been rude to me online before, so I hesitated coming on. But
I'm trying to wait patiently, but I don't want to lose track of your points. So if you could make whatever the rest of you what you say, shrink it down so I can keep track. That I would appreciate it.
Why don't you go ahead and respond to what you go ahead? You go ahead and respond, and then I'll finish my points when you're done.
Okay. When you talked about the couples that the husband is addicted to porn, and you're talking to a couple who married and they're both in their early 20s, this is an issue that we discussed on Facebook. You asked me the question about. Sorry, I'm not sure if you asked me the question or if you made the statement that is the wife responsible in some way for her husband's having a porn addiction. And I said, in its inception, no, not necessarily. I mean, sure, people get addicted to porn before they get married and they carry that over, sure. But in its continuation, no. What we have is lots of people who are telling men to try and fight their porn addictions, and they're not recommending the thing that they're not recommending marital sex as part of the solution. They're specifically denying that it is. And so in the continuation of a husband's addiction to pornography, if he wants to have sex and his wife's not giving to him, then yes, she shares blame for the continuation of it. What else did you say? See, this is the whole thing. I lost track of some of the things.
Okay. Well, let me I'll make another point and then I'll let you talk. What's very, very interesting is a lot of in these situations, the men who are addicted to pornography are the ones not interested in marital intimacy. It's not the wives turning them down, it's actually the husbands. And I will give a very specific situation, and I know this is an uncomfortable topic, but since we're talking about it,
we gave out
we
gave out the explicit warning, so we're good.
Okay. A young wife who is begging her husband almost every night to be intimate with her. And he finally tells her, do not ask me more than once a week. They have been married less than a year. The porn addiction started before the wedding. That is more typical of the situation than what I think you are assuming it is. And I think this is the big problem. I think you as an unmarried man are looking at the situation, and you know what? I would have thought the same thing. Before I learned and talked to women, I actually thought the same thing you did. But after talking to the women that I have, I think in most cases it has little to do with the husband-wife relationship.
Are you done? Can I respond?
Obviously, I've stopped, Matt.
Okay, well, I don't want to start talking and then I wind up interrupting you. I don't see, my arguments have been scriptural in nature. Whether I am single or married or widowed is not the point. I never brought up any. I mean, we've had a discussion this whole time. Nobody brought up my marital status and said, well, you're wrong because of that. I didn't bring up Vicky Teague's marital status. I didn't bring up your marital status. So I don't think that has anything to do with that. Unless you can refute the interpretation from Scripture, then there's really nothing more else to say after that.
One thing I want to mention here really quickly, Matt, is Colleen here has actually brought up something that's something that we didn't discuss, where the woman is, performing the wifely duties, giving the conjugal rights or whatever you want to call them.
To.
Yeah, exactly. And where the husband is the one who is going, no, I'd rather stick with whatever. So again,
Well, I think we can all agree that the husband's the blame at that point.
me going with the extremes again, I guess. But
well, no,
but there's a reason. There's a reason for that, Matt. Hang on one second. There's a reason for that. And just before I get started, I'd like to say that to blame someone else for your own sin is unbiblical. And Colleen is exactly right. Most porn addictions happen before men and women get married, and after they're married, when you have a man that's addicted to porn, marital sex doesn't fill that void. It's a different type of sensation. It's a different type of chemical activity that goes on in your brain when you view the pictures or you view the video or whatever it is. I mean, this is stuff that's actually been studied out pretty well. So it's not that the marital sex itself is going to fill that void. So that's not just the answer. I will agree with you that women shouldn't withhold, just as Colleen did. That's, I wouldn't say it's a moot point, but it's a point that everyone agrees on. But you have to understand that it's a different situation when a man's addicted to pornography than it is when he's having sex with his wife. It's not the same sensations. It's not the same chemicals being or chemical reactions happening in his brain. It's probably even a different area of the brain. So
yeah, but the solution
statistics will show that the marital sex will not fill that void in someone who is addicted to pornography.
If you're talking about the artificial need created by the porn addiction, then I would agree with you. Cutting a person off from sex altogether that makes about as much sense as saying that because you discovered a man drinking out of a sewer, you should deny him access to fresh water.
I don't think anybody has posited that, have they?
Yes. Vicky Teague said when you discover your husband has a porn addiction, that you should go on a sexual fast.
Well, I think that's...
Yes, you did.
Let me step in now. She said that a lot of counselors will recommend that. That's exactly
that's right.
That's what she said. She did not tell women in my audience go on a sexual fast.
Oh no, she did. Wait. Yes, she did. She did. She absolutely did say that. I can read off the quote. 49 minutes, 20 seconds into the episode 22 of Theology Gals. She said, I think that when you first find out that there's pornography, there does need to be a period of a sexual fast. Okay. And you should be doing that with the consultation of a professional therapist. She's personally making the recommendation.
Okay, she said with a therapist. So let me tell you this. That is another thing that I actually asked. Now, I'm going to be very graphic here.
Go ahead.
So in situations with women that I've talked to, and I'm not a professional counselor, I actually find free biblical counseling for women in these situations. So I want to make that clear. But in these situations, one of the problems that does happen, because I'm not sure who it was that was talking before, but so sorry, I don't see your name, but what he was saying, the different parts of the brain, one thing that does happen is that a man is addicted to pornography, they get married, and sometimes the man is impotent in his relationship with his wife, and that this is a true thing. And sometimes having a time of a sexual fast is what heals that. And I'm trying to be careful how I say all of this. So I actually talked, after talking to you, I talked to a couple of people, and they said they did go have a short sexual fast in which they devoted themselves to prayer and then they came back. And I actually think that that is absolutely biblical. If the couple agrees.
It's wise too.
Right, if the couple agrees, and that's only a maybe, which means even if they agree, they shouldn't necessarily do it. It's still not necessarily a good decision.
Oh,
but Paul, but your whole argument is 1 Corinthians 7, 1-5, and Paul himself says that it's okay to take a short break and then come back.
Maybe
to devote yourself to prayer.
Yeah, except that's a maybe. That's a maybe. There's no indication that the prayer itself is going to keep you free from temptation. It says it's for a limited time. And then he even says, after he already told them that it was a limited time, he told them to come together again. There's no reason to say, come together again.
Where did Colleen just now say that it's...
I'm responding to the gentleman who just spoke. I'm responding to the gentleman who just spoke. And if you want, I don't think this counts as a sexual fast, but given that you won't be having sex during this period, I'm pointing out the fact that even if that's what that is, the Bible says, verse 5 says, come together again. You don't have, if it's already a limited time, then you already know you're supposed to come together again when it's over. I say the reasons that Paul said, come together again so that Satan will not tempt you is because there are people who think that prayer will keep them safe from temptation, and they're wrong.
And I wanted to add something.
What's prayer? What is he talking about prayer there then for?
Can I just point something out?
In this context, what is the prayer?
Hey, hold on. Let Matt Yester go ahead. He's been waiting a while. Go ahead, Matt Yester.
Yeah. I was just saying. Okay, well, what's the prayer there?
What's the prayer? It doesn't say. It just says devote yourselves to prayer.
Okay, but it's in a specific context. We're to interpret the words and define the words in its context, and he brings up prayer here.
Okay.
Prayer is not to change the mind of God, of course. It's to change us. So they, as husband and wife, are to readjust their focuses on what they've been focused upon. You can have antecedent causes and stuff like that is brought up. You got this conflict between husband and wife. You contributed to this and she contributed to that and blah, blah, blah. You contributed to her frigidity and, she is guilty for leading you into temptation, but you still commit sin. But why is prayer brought up here? Isn't the teaching of prayer is that prayer is to change us. It's not to change God or anything like that, what he's actually decreed. But the purpose of prayer is to change us, to not focus upon our fleshly needs to the extent that they usurp everything else. I think that's the purpose why he even brings this up here, is a particular point. It's not like, well, why'd you bring this up, Paul? No reason. But the word's right there. So,
it's an exception clause. That's all it is an exception to the rule. The rule is you have sex, and you only maybe do this exception, which means, generally speaking, you won't do this.
Yeah, and it's to align them. What are they supposed to be doing? What proper husband and wife relationship ought to be. Obviously, there's a disjunction here that's causing problems. The purpose of prayer is to get them focused upon. That's the purpose of prayer, is to change our priorities.
Which is not right, which is listed as an exception to having sex. The sex is what is made important. If that's what if you want to say that about prayer, I don't necessarily disagree with you.
Okay.
But having sex between the husband and the wife is the key element. It is the solution. That is an exception.
Correct. But he brings it up here because it's to resolve the problems.
Resolve the
right. Come together in a wrong relationship or come together again in a right relationship.
All it says is it devotes yourselves to prayer.
They come together again. Is it supposed to be disjunctive again? Disjointed?
It is disjunctive. It's an exception. So yes, it's disjunctive.
So they're in right relationship, and then they pray, and then it's still right relationship. I think the whole purpose of bringing up the prayer here is because we are already enumerating numerous problems.
I'm arguing that he brought up prayer because there are people, like some of the people in this hangout, who think prayer is enough to help you resist the temptation to sexual sin. I think he brought up prayer to address people like that and tell them that's not true. You need to be having marital sex.
Well, I think
So
Christ
prayer was worthless bringing up in this contest by Paul.
No, it's important to bring it up because he's addressing people who would think that as long as they pray, they'll be okay.
But what is the purpose of the prayer? No purpose? Yeah.
No, it's not that there's no purpose. It's just it's comparing the two and saying one is less important than the other. Not worthless. Prayer is never worthless, but there's a way you're supposed to go about solving a specific problem of temptation to sexual sin.
Right. So sex is higher than prayer?
And yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
That's what I was trying to see where you're coming from here. I think it's
that's what it says. That's why prayer is an exception. It says maybe. So if a person decides
not
not
to, it's the exception. I think it's the very means by which
sinning.
you're restored in the right relationship with husband and wife. Both should be praying. Both should refocus their priorities. In spite of what one did to the other, vice versa, you know, I'm frigid because of this. I don't think frigid is actually a biblical term, but if he's the antecedent cause to that, and then that begets his sin, and, you know, you got one blaming the other, so to speak, here, that what's the purpose of the prayer here? Reconciliation, and then when they're joined together again, that is in a right relationship. Otherwise, he's just bringing up prayer here is like, well, that's just a break. I think there's a purpose.
It is just a break.
I think there's a purpose to prayer.
Was the purpose the prayer purpose of prayer is multiply? One of the primary things is to change us. But even there it says except perhaps. I'm using the ESV, by the way.
They're depriving each other beforehand, and then they pray, and then to come together again. I think it's resolving the depriving thing. Right? That's what I see right there in the text. That's the context. To stop depriving each other, okay? And then he brings up prayer in this context. Agreement for a time so that you may devote yourselves to prayer and come together again. See, the first context, they're depriving each other, and then you're taking a break, or like, okay, we devote ourselves to prayer. Devote yourselves to prayer and come together again. There's a different relationship here. It's supposed to be the result of prayer. So go ahead.
The result, the thing that you're commanded to do so that Satan won't tempt you is not the prayer. It's come together again.
Okay, so there's no purpose to prayer here.
I don't.
But what is the purpose?
There's no purpose.
I'm actually illustrating what the purpose of prayer is here. I want to know what your purpose of prayer is here.
I've said it already. It's to change us. That's one reason. You could pray to God that He would sanctify you and help
to change them from depriving each other, right?
Say that again.
It's to change them from depriving each other.
That's
I don't think direct antecedent before bringing up prayer here. Paul brings up the context of they are depriving each other. He says pray. That's the direct antecedent. Why does he bring up prayer? To resolve this issue.
So in your opinion, the word prayer specifically has to do with praying that they would not deprive each other.
That's the direct antecedent, is it not?
No, it's not. It says stop
depriving one another, except by agreement for a time. The agreement here is for prayer.
The agreement is to prayer.
That you may devote yourselves to prayer.
For what? It doesn't say pray that you will not deprive on each other. He just says pray and then come together again. What
talking about here regarding prayer? I want to know. I say it's the direct antecedent, the first part of the verse.
If you go back and listen to this later, I have said part of the at least part of the reason, if not the primary reason, I think he mentioned prayer is because people will think that prayer will keep you safe from temptation to sexual sin. That is not just in verse 5. That is in the verses preceding it directly. There are people that think all they have to do is pray. They're wrong, and this is a place where Paul addresses that. That's the purpose of mentioning prayer. It's not to talk about what you would pray while you were praying. It's to make sure you lay to bed this idea that the prayer is enough.
I think it's interesting that you think that Paul would write a letter to the church in Corinth where rampant sexual sin was on display, orgies going on everywhere, and he would tell them, no, don't pray, just have sex.
He didn't say don't pray. He said you might pray, but if you might deprive each other for a limited time for prayer.
But you said
that's not the
that
same
prayer
thing as
doesn't
saying
work.
prayer isn't going to do anything. That's not none of the things that you just said.
I just said, what is the purpose of prayer there? Refocusing their priorities, as what I stated.
Say it. He doesn't say it.
But in context, what is he talking about there in this context?
Nothing in the context says anything about the specific contents of the prayers that you make. It says nothing like that.
Right. The antecedents are irrelevant. Okay, gotcha.
No, they're not irrelevant. They just don't have that information in there.
If they're relevant, we got to read stuff in context. You're just denying the antecedent. If he's saying, all right, here's an issue.
Verses say anything about the contents of the prayer.
Yes, depriving one another.
No, the depriving one another is not a part of the
change
prayer.
them and their actions of depriving each other. They should change their priorities.
That's.
I mean, it's right there.
No. Stop depriving one another is right there, but it's not mentioned as part of the contents of one of the things you would pray that you would not do. If you just had sex, you don't have to pray that you would stop depriving each other. You just had sex. That makes even less sense.
Then why did he bring it up? That's my question to you. If you haven't even addressed the prayer, you're saying that's insufficient. I think Paul thought it was very sufficient.
Yeah, I'm with you, Matt. I think the why is what you have to ask, because there is no reason to interject. Hey guys, you just stop having sex to pray. What would be the purpose of that? There's no logical sense in that.
Especially if
I've already brought up the reason why. I keep repeating it.
All right, say it again for me.
It's because there are people that thought that if they pray, that's enough. They'll be able to resist the temptation to sexual sin. He's not bringing up prayer to talk about the contents of prayer. He's bringing it up because there are people that have this belief that prayer is powerful enough that that's all they need, and that if they don't have sex, that's okay. And he's going out of his way to demonstrate that's not true.
Sex. I'm just saying, I've already enunciated very clearly that it's to get them in right relationship. Both of them get their priorities straight so that when they do come together, that's not neglecting sex. But when they do come together again to have sex, it's in a right relationship. Neither one's depriving the other.
I reject your interpretation.
That's the whole verse. That's the whole verse right there in a nutshell.
No, it's not. It is so not in there. That is so
I never
not
said what you said and saying, well, sex is not relevant here. No, it's both prayer and the sex. It's when you join together again.
Sex is not relevant. I did not say
right
that.
In the middle. So, but that's the point I wanted to make. You're not consistent with the verse.
I completely disagree. I think anybody who spends time meditating on this verse without some feminist agenda in the back of their mind can see who's right about the verse.
Yeah, you got a pretty low view of prayer. That's what I think. So.
Hey, Paul's the one who said it. Come together again after the prayer.
That's not neglecting it. Well, sure, they should. They ought to. That's their charisma. That's the gift of God. Paul says to be single is a charisma. And also being wedded, being wed to your wife is a charismatic gift. It's both. They're both charismatic gifts. Paul's to be single, that's a charismatic gift. To be wedded, that's also that person's charismatic gift. That's
don't even
brought up there, verse 7. Verse 7. The gift there
I'm not
is
sure if I even agree or disagree with the use of the term charismatic gift.
It's right there. 1 Corinthians 7:7 is charisma.
Charisma, yep.
Yeah, right here. 1 Corinthians 7.
I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift. Okay, gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. Okay,
one of another. No problem with that. That's exactly right. In this context, he's talking about one and then the other. He's talking about singleness and being married. That's both their charismatic gift. That is a charisma in the text.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's someone brought up. I think someone brought up the gift. In this context earlier, so I wanted to address that. But it's very important in this light here of what already preceded this. He's saying that there's a reason for interjecting prayer into this. It's not purposeless. Prayer is never purposeless.
And nobody ever suggested that it was. You're fighting with somebody who doesn't even.
I think the context defines for us, because it's not. He's like leaving us out in limbo. I have no idea what the prayer is for.
I agree that the context defines it, but you're saying that the context indicates the content of the prayer. If I were to say the content of the prayer was that we understood the Trinity better, I don't think you could find that anywhere.
I let it be defined as the words brought up. There's a purpose to the prayer, and it's relevant to this context. And I think the direct antecedent of that verse.
No, there's a purpose to sex. There's a purpose to sex, and that you only maybe stop to pray, and that's only a maybe. Why? I mean, if you think that the prayer necessarily means
pray if everything's fine.
If you think the prayer necessarily means that we're getting our priorities straight, then there's no way Paul would ever say that maybe you should pray if you should get your priorities straight, but if your priorities are wrong,
that's the purpose
then,
of prayer. That's to change us, not God. It's to change us. So what are we changing about us in this context?
I think we're going to go round and round on this.
There you go. So
What?
I think I have a point. So
no, he never.
I don't see why prayer there can't be the antecedent of the reason why Satan won't tempt you.
Look, the point is the verse does not say anything about the contents of the prayer. It does. It is this.
It absolutely says something about the concept of the prayer. It
says nothing about the
context of the prayer itself is because of people that are depriving each other.
No, that doesn't say that.
You ought not be doing that, right?
Deprive one another, except
even you claim they ought not be doing that.
If you think
you said the wife ought not be depriving the man, okay, because she's going to be guilty for leading him to temptation, because she's going to be the cause of Satan tempting him. He's going to be responsible for his own sin of giving into it. So she's responsible for the temptation. He's responsible for giving into the temptation. So there's two different sins that they are actually guilty of.
I think we're treading over old ground at this point. But the thing is, if the contents of the prayer are as you say, that it is about getting your priorities straight, then there's no way Paul would say that maybe you should do that. There is no way he would ever say anything like that. He would never make it a maybe, that maybe you should have your priorities straight. He would never do that.
I never said maybe.
So that means that it can't
prayer
be
is because he's already explicitly stated that. It's not a maybe. It's you got these problems, because I'm addressing 1 Corinthians. He's addressing the Corinthian church who has a whole host of problems. So when he's going to bring correction to them, he started in chapter 1, in the chapter 2, and in the chapter 3, just a whole host of correction brought to them because they're living very carnally. This is his whole scope of 1 Corinthians, bring correction to the church. And he's going to correct them over and over and over and over again. And he's going to give solutions to it. And this is one of the solutions he does bring up. I think it's very, very important in the whole scope of things. Just read the whole epistle. That's his whole purpose here, is to constantly be correcting these guys so that they do get their priorities straight, both men and women. Go ahead.
I don't agree with the general gist of that about the purpose of the letter to the Corinthians. I disagree with your specific
Verse 1, they're having
argument
divisions.
about what
You're holding on to man-made philosophy, and then this whole point of going into chapter 1 into chapter 2 is the wisdom of the world is ultimately foolishness, but the wisdom of God. You got that contrast right there, and then he addresses their carnality because they're not dropping their philosophical bent. So he brings corrections because he's like, all right, first thing I'm going to address is these divisions among you. Why are you having these divisions? Because you're adhering to wisdom of the world. I mean, he brought correction to him right there from the very beginning. It's brought up here on a personal relationship here when he gets into marriage and stuff like that. I think this is very, very important. It's been right there from the very beginning. He's already correcting them. Chapters 1, 2, and 3. Boom, he lays the gauntlet.
I don't think I disagree with anything you're saying. No, no,
right.
You're right. Yeah. I don't think I disagree with any of that.
Okay. Right. So he's bringing correction to them here in this instance. Right. So, but what the problem I'm having here, Matt, is where you're kind of dismissing prayer here as we can't really discern what they are actually praying about. But Paul brings this up as a solution to it. It's not the only solution, because after this prayer happens, they are to be reunited under proper relationship, because the previous antecedent here, you're not in proper relationship. Set aside time, prayer, and come together. You ought to be in right relationship. He's bringing correction to them.
Yeah, I don't disagree that he's being correction, but you and I obviously don't agree on what the correction actually is. I'm satisfied that I've made my point. So if there's any
Me too,
other
me too. That's all right.
points
Yeah,
that anybody wants to make,
there's a good go around.
Well, I think we're going to go round and round on this first.
Right.
I
Yeah,
want-
we're not going to have any agreement on here, but I
Right.
think that's
So,
very
so
perfect.
real quick, Colleen, did you have anything else you wanted to address? And sorry for.
No, I think you guys did a good job.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, I actually wanted to bring up something kind of in relation to something Colleen said earlier in regard to the fasting. You know, that there, if someone is struggling with such addictions, that there might be that there have been good benefits from there being a fast. I've actually and this relates to the addiction part of the porn thing, you know, where you know, someone doing a specific thing and getting that dopamine hit, their brain can become addicted to that. So having a fast, and what I'll say is this is specifically from the porn itself, not necessarily from the sex or sexual relations or whatnot. But I know at the very least they've had successes in getting someone to get over, and this is something that Colleen brought up, impotence, where they actually had they abstained from porn. And again, if Colleen wants to talk a little bit more about the other forms of
on that note, I would actually agree. I would agree on that point, because there are men. I mean, I've talked to men around the world, and one guy talked to me about his masturbating more than 10 times every single day, and this was an unsaved man, and talking about how he couldn't. He finally got a girlfriend who was willing to have sex with him, but he wasn't aroused enough. And I was like, dude, the reason is obvious. You are spent, and you've probably got all kinds of bruises. And you need to heal from that. And so in that light, I can see that it's that abstaining from sex, but that's because you're almost literally taking wounds of injury into your body.
I'm not even talking about more physical. It's
actually more than
brain chemistry issue. Similar to like just smoke addiction, where it's like, okay, I have to have something in my mouth because of the dopamine hit that I would get from this, that, or the other thing.
Sure.
You know, so it goes beyond just the you know, physicality of it. It's
right. And my response would be that you do not in as far as we're just going to talk about the dopamine levels. If you get more from porn or more from sex, or you know, or however you want to go about that, you don't. If you find a guy who's drinking from a sewer, you don't forbid him from drinking fresh water. If you got a kid who's eating junk food and he's getting a huge rush out of that, it tastes way better than savory foods. You don't prohibit him from eating savory foods just because he eats the candy. In the same line, you don't forbid a man who wants to have sex, and since sex is a need, unlike candy, you don't forbid a man who wants to have sex with his wife from having it because, well, he looked at porn. There are women who take that attitude, and it's because they read female Christian authors like Shayla Ray Gregoire.
Really quickly,
this is coming from somebody. It's not an accident.
Really quickly.
Okay.
Let Colleen respond, please.
I was just going to say, I want to respond that in the cases that I talk to, and this is the only way that I personally would recommend it, although I do not professionally counsel these ladies, and that is only if a husband and wife both agree. But the reason why the couples that I know have done so is for the same reason that you talked about your friend. It almost resets their brain, because what happens during marital intimacy and what happens with pornography is two different things in the brain. And so there can be wisdom in doing something like, in having a time where they focus on the Lord and just a time to reset the brain. So there can be wisdom in things like that. I don't know. I personally, and I think there's maybe some assumptions going on here, I never would tell a woman to abstain from marital intimacy when her husband doesn't want to. I would never do that, and I don't think that that's what we said in the podcast. And I think okay, go ahead.
I was going to say that's actually what I was going to bring up. The first
Oh,
part
no,
of
I'm
this
sorry.
thing
I
you were
have to break in and respond here.
Okay.
Colleen, you may not have said that personally yourself, but Vicky Teague does say that. We read a quote earlier. I still have it on my screen.
Did she say women, even if your husbands want to have sex, don't do it? Because she did not say that. She said
Yeah, here, go ahead. Keep going. I'll bring up the quote.
No,
Or do you want me to? Okay, hang on 1 second.
Yeah, I can finish off what I was going to say.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to get distracted. I can't. Come on. I know it's. Oh, it's in Google Books. Here we go. Yeah, page 121.
Wait. That wasn't on my podcast then, so it's not even up for discussion. That was not on my podcast.
Listen, you promoted the book. This is part of the reason that podcast is a problem.
At least be clear. At least be clear.
I am clear. This is in her book, and it wasn't specifically mentioned on your podcast, but you promoted the book on the podcast. So that makes it relevant. She said, this is Vicky Teague, page 121, when your husband is addicted to pornography, healing your wounded heart. She writes, I'm going to offer a few ideas for you and your husband to consider implementing when you are ready to be sexually intimate. Encourage your husband to verbally ask you if you'd like to be sexual with him. This will help you feel respected and will allow you the freedom to say no with honesty and without repercussion. Now, if you want to disavow that, Colleen, you can, but it's a little late now that you've said that, now that you've gone ahead and told people to buy this book.
You know what, Matt? I need to be really honest. I'm having a very difficult time with this discussion. I think you're really disrespectful of me, especially for someone who's about my own children's ages, just the whole tone. So I'm not even sure that I want to continue on talking with you. Sorry.
That's up to you. I haven't complained about your tone or your critical remarks about me personally. I'm happy to have the discussion.
This started before this. You were rude to me on Facebook, so
Yes, we had a dispute on Facebook, but I have not brought that up. Only you have. I've been trying to answer your questions from what I've said about the Bible and about the contents of the book. I've not said, you know what, Colleen was rude. She talked down to me because of my age or any. I haven't brought that up. This isn't about you and me. So can we just leave that aside?
The other guys can go ahead and talk if they want to respond to what he said.
Well, I just want to know one thing. If the context of that quote from that book was in regards to helping a woman heal through something like this, I guess the question is a husband loving his wife like Christ loves the church if he betrays her and then expects his conjugal rights immediately? Because she's within her rights to say, I want a divorce. So I guess the question after that is, does she need to immediately decide if she wants a divorce? And if he doesn't want one and she doesn't want one, well, is there grace in that? Is
there grace in it? It's his right to have the sex. It's not a matter of being gracious or selfless or loving her as Christ loved the church.
He has every right.
It is loving.
It's not. No, it's not. No. It is not loving. Listen, depriving him is leaving him vulnerable to temptation. It's not sanctifying.
Yeah, but here's the thing:
temptation.
Porn addiction has almost nothing to do with physical needs.
Garbage. I don't accept that for a moment.
Well, then you're just like every other young man that I talk to that's a porn addict that thinks getting married's gonna fix it.
I don't think that. I've talked to my pastor, and we've been over this. And I know that's going to be a difficulty, but I'm sure as heck not going to marry a woman without letting her know about my problems first.
But I can tell you, I've been a porn addict that's got plenty of sex from my wife, and I have low testosterone. It's a brain thing. It has to do with control. It has to do with escape and comfort, and ultimately all of that is rooted in idolatry. Whatever you run to for comfort is your idol. And if it's not the Lord, if Jesus is not enough for you, regardless of your circumstances, it doesn't matter what you're entitled to by Scripture. Like, your heart's not right.
It doesn't matter what you're entitled to by Scripture.
No, like, it doesn't matter if you're entitled to your conjugal rights. I'm not saying that those don't apply. I'm just saying, dude, if your heart's not right, you have a bigger if you've got an idol that you're not letting go of, you got a bigger problem than just,
getting your fix.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because that's your God. You're not a slave to your desires. You're not a slave to your desires.
It's not idolatry to demand you have something that belongs to you.
Just like overeating with food, like I mentioned before.
It depends on your motives.
You don't deserve to overeat, but you do deserve to eat.
But again, yeah, it depends on the heart behind the desire. That's what determines an idol, not something that's morally neutral. Sex isn't bad. God created it. It's great. But we twist it and we make it sinful. And so,
okay, but in the situation,
it comes down to the heart behind that.
In the situation you proposed, where should a husband, if he's going to love his wife as Christ loved the church, is it loving of him to demand sex from his wife right away? In that specific context, yeah, it's what he belongs to him. I don't think if he discovered she had a porn addiction, that he has an inherent right to not provide her with money or to go to work the next day. The Bible doesn't give him that kind of leeway. It just doesn't.
Yeah, but but it also gives her leeway to say, no, you're not going to get those rights, and I'm divorcing you.
Well, look,
and I'm justified in doing
him.
that.
She can divorce him, but she doesn't get to stay married and disobey God's commands. She has to pick one or the other. If she's not going to divorce him, there are clear instructions for how she's supposed to conduct herself towards him. And it's not
the real world.
And it's not to lord it over him that, hey, I technically have the right to divorce, so now you're going to do things my way.
No, I'm not talking about that.
The way that you're
talking
about
Lord.
Well, hold on, real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
The way you're talking, Matt, it sounds like that the husband gets to lord over the wife, that he gets the right to divorce, or he gets the right to her body.
I didn't say anything about lording it. It's just not sinful for him to say he should have it. Is it sinful for a husband to say to his wife, I want to have sex with you, and yeah, it's and if she says, well, no, it's like, what do you mean no?
It
would be like a fight.
My question.
Dude, there's a million circumstances. What if she's like, no, I'm going through chemo because I have cancer? I mean,
that is a completely unrelated situation. We're talking about the scenario of a healthy. We haven't even mentioned this a hidden secret cancer she might have. All things being equal, assuming she's not dying from some deadly disease.
But it's his right.
And I feel kind of. I feel
it's his right to her body, according to you.
So because there's some. So in other words, you don't accept what I said because you can think of a situation where the wife is basically a dead person walking.
No,
and that refutes my interpretation.
My premise is this.
Well, I was just following this logic.
I agree with you, Cody, and I'm actually gonna lay it out because I agree with everything that you're saying. My premise is this: and we talked about this last night, or what was it, 2 nights ago? Prince, we've got 2 Matts on here, so I'm going to call you Prince.
Okay.
We talked about this 2 nights ago. We can't just ignore what Paul said to the Ephesians about how wives and husbands should interact with one another, and so this whole, well, it's my conjugal right, so I deserve it, is not a loving way by any means. And so what we're attempting to do here is to show that your position you've taken is quite absurd in certain situations.
Thank you, Brian. I was hoping to bring that up.
Certain situations.
So again, according to you, his need is for sex. He needs sex. Full stop. Right?
You can't self-sacrifice that.
You have a video.
It's not a matter of self-sacrifice.
Stop. Hold on.
It can be.
Hold on, guys. So you agree that men need sex, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so also 1 Corinthians 7 says that a man gets sex, according to you, or should get sex whenever he wants it, correct?
Yes.
All right. So when his wife is in chemotherapy, he can demand sex.
No. That would cause damage to her body. That could possibly kill her. There's no right.
Hold on. Wait. Your premise is that he gets sex whenever he wants because that's his conjugal rights.
Listen, the dynamic is completely transformed when you add in this other element.
No, you've made an absolute statement. You've made an absolute statement that men. Now it's
you're not stating it's a general principle, though, man.
No,
I think that might be the issue that we're running into.
The general principle to which there are exceptions to a rule. Yes.
So that okay, then that may be for me anyway. That's one of the reasons why I think you're coming off a bit more harsh than you actually are meaning to be.
Look,
how in that situation would he not be
I'm not the one who keeps bringing up things like cancer-ridden wives. Okay, that's you guys.
I mean, let me bring. I'll bring up a very common one. I'll bring up actually 3 common ones. Well, maybe just 2. Period. The 6 weeks after childbirth, and also sickness. For instance, if she's puking her guts out. So we're not talking chemotherapy. We're talking common cold. We're talking flu. We're talking period, which happens every 30 days, and we're talking. Well, no, it's actually less than 30 days because the week. Anyway, and we're talking the 6 weeks after childbirth, which is actually the reason why we're supposed to. One of the main reasons why we're supposed to have sex. But anyway, so in those situations, can the man demand his conjugal rights?
I would go through them one by one. If she's puking her guts out, then no. And
but it's his conjugal rights. He needs to.
I give you the same answer I gave you with the cancer-ridden wife.
So he's to be self-sacrificial, right?
Ill, then no. And assuming they both were doing their part up to that point, and they're having sex on average once a day, then it would not be a need of his to have sex. It would not be a need at that point. It might be a want, but it wouldn't be a need. As far as when it comes to
or a want.
What's the difference between a need or a want?
Well, no. What determines whether it's a need or a want?
Well, what would determine whether it would be a want is how much sex he got up till that point. If he had sex consistently on a consistent basis and his appetite was satisfied, then going for a day where his wife has the flu, that would be total. That would not be difficult for him to overcome, to endure.
6 weeks.
So,
6 weeks after childbirth.
6 weeks. There's all.
Take the big one out of here.
It's the 6 weeks of childbirth. That just rules out normal sexual intercourse. There's all kinds of things a wife can do.
Does he have a need or a want?
Yes, that's a need. Yes, those are needs. Yes. There's all kinds of things a wife can do.
Is he not to be self-sacrificial in this context?
There's no point. There's nothing. She's not going to get hurt by doing it.
Paul gets a command: husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church.
It's not unloving to have sex with your wife in a non-normal sexual intercourse way. It has nothing to.
We're addressing that non-normal thing. We're trying to address here what is the command of the husband that he's supposed to do in this context. To be self-sacrificial.
There's nothing that he's not asking.
To put her needs above his own. Right?
It's not a matter of taking her needs away or superseding them. If she's
if he
can't have normal sexual intercourse.
His needs. You
what
said
need?
he
Okay, what
needs
need?
Constantly. Okay. What about the 6 week gap here you have here?
Yes.
What's he supposed to do?
Be self-sacrificial? Yes, in a 6 week gap, they can still have sex, and if it's not normal, normal sex, there's all kinds of things she can do. It's not unloving to ask her to do those things. It has nothing. That's why I keep saying it has nothing to do with that. Okay. It's not unloving. It's not a matter of not being
intercourse. You're saying?
Well, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. After my wife gave birth to her children, she was extremely tired. She wanted to sleep all the time, and I mean, she was going through postpartum depression. She was going through, especially with our first, she was going through the discovery of how do I be a mom? Why can't I breastfeed my child? Why is my child doing this, that, and the other? The last thing on her mind, and to be honest with you, the last thing on my mind was sex, and again,
if you didn't want sex, that's fine. That's
no. I wanted sex.
You just said sex was the last thing on your mind.
Yeah, but it was still on his mind. It was the last thing, but it was still there.
Still on my mind.
Yeah, but if it's the last thing on your mind, then you must not have wanted it very much. So,
Priority.
and you've
There
already
we
told
go.
me you have. Oh, you've already told me you have a low testosterone level. So
Nope,
perhaps your
that
sex
was
drive
not-
is lower than.
That was me.
You got his priorities, didn't he?
That was actually Cody. That wasn't me.
Oh,
Yeah,
that
it
was
sounds- it
okay.
sounds
My
like-
mistake. My mistake. But if you tell me there was the last thing on your mind, that tells me that you didn't need it very much.
No,
So
it
that's
actually means that I put my wife's priorities ahead of my own.
again, there's nothing. Oh my goodness, it's like you guys don't. It's I don't. It feels like I'm not even talking to real guys, and that's what's so weird because you guys are married. You know, there's other sexual acts a wife can perform. It's
I'm not
not a
married.
matter. Look, please. It's not asking her to do something besides normal sexual intercourse has nothing to do with putting her needs above her own. It has nothing to do with any of those things. You're not hurting her. You're not preventing her from resting. You're not doing any of those things.
Now,
And-
You know, hey, actually, you know what?
It's
I can agree in that
I've got
context.
something that I want to mention here really quickly. What if in
I'm
having
not, wait, hold on. I'm not preventing her
Okay,
from
never mind.
resting by waking her up and asking her to perform a sex act on me.
It's so because it's one time when she happens to be asleep at that particular second. How about when she's awake and you can just get it over and done with?
Here, I've got something.
This is.
I've got something I want to mention. really
Go
quickly.
ahead, Vincent. Go ahead.
Because what if, for instance, your wife, and hey, you know, maybe this is something that she struggles with as a person, you know, that she feels as though you coming to her and going, hey, baby, I want to have sex, and then you have sex, and hey, baby, I want to have sex, and you have sex. What if after a while she starts to feel, you know, that's something that, you know, one of the only reasons why you like her, you know, and so she feels like that's all you really want her for, and as a result, maybe even through counseling or whatnot, you find out, okay, well, maybe I should put her needs before my own. Let her know that that's not the only reason why I'm coming to her, you know, for that, in order to help to show her that. Would that be another valid reason where there's really nothing physically wrong with her, but emotionally she has a need that you have to meet by self-sacrificing your own sexual desires? Would that fall into a category of, you know, what we're kind of discussing?
I think if she's late, see, the thing is, when a man has sex with a woman, he bonds with her. He's going to like her outside of the context of the particular sex act.
Yes,
So,
but I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about her, not
And-
him. Stop thinking about yourself.
right? He should,
And think
and
about her.
she should, if she has half a brain cell, know that if he's liking her outside of that context, that he doesn't like her only for the sex.
Now you're insulting my hypothetical wife's intelligence.
She's a non-existent wife.
I understand that, but
Come on.
okay, have you dated women before?
Yes.
Okay, then you understand that women can be emotional, right?
Well, I'd say women definitely are emotional.
Okay.
But if they completely miss the fact that as a result of having the sex, he likes hanging out with her, he likes staying up with her late at night to talk about stuff. If she's still that dumb that she hasn't figured out that he is happy to be with her even after the act is done, if she still can't figure that out,
Oh, that's
maybe
her fault. You don't have to do anything. No self-sacrifice there, right?
no, you don't have. You have under no obligation to stop having sex with her because he thinks there's something, because she doesn't get it.
Okay, hold on. So the only way that she can get emotional gratification is by putting out.
I said nothing like
Yes,
that.
I don't think you said anything like that, but he was basically calling her
pretty
stupid for.
close. Because he was saying that in order to it was all along the premise of the man will feel bonded towards the woman after the act. And so if after the act he is now paying more attention to her and she doesn't realize it, why shouldn't he pay more attention to her before the act?
If he has to say as a prerequisite to having sex, honey, I love you, even though there are times, even when we're not having sex at this particular second. If he has to say that, okay, but that should be a given. It will show itself in his behavior. So, and you're positing that she might still not get it. Okay, that doesn't tell me that he needs to stop having sex with her. Maybe some re-education is in order, but that sounds like
anything but going, okay, you know, honey, just to show you that that's not the only reason, I will actually abstain for a time.
Anything but that. that I could use that about some of the things you guys have said. But he has to deny himself what he needs because she thinks that he doesn't love her outside of that act.
Well, I mean, it doesn't even necessarily need to be that specifically. All I guess, I mean, I and Matt and a couple other people have brought up in the past is, or in this conversation is, do you think that being self-sacrificing in all ways is a part of being in a marriage relationship?
Yes.
Okay, that includes sex.
No.
I said always.
You could talk about always and talk about laying bricks on a foundation. I did that. That's
the exception, right? So not self-sacrificial in terms of.
1 Corinthians 7 says, "Don't deprive; you'll be tempted by Satan." Case closed.
Yeah, because they're to be in the right relationship. That was my whole point.
All right. I've got a quick question.
Go ahead, Vincent.
Wait, I've got something that might be really pertinent here.
And after you're done, Vincent, I also have something that would be very pertinent as well.
And for all I know, it might be the same thing. But
well, it could be. Go for it.
Really quickly, and everyone, please jump on me if I'm reading this incorrectly. But
this is me jumping on you. No,
oh, gotcha. But the so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control, isn't that during the time of fasting sex?
No, he says come together again. He says you do not deprive each other. Come together again. In between that, you have this limited time of prayer.
Yeah, and again, it's come together again now that you've had the time of fasting of sex, so that Satan will not tempt you, right? So there's the fasting there, and then that's preventing Satan from tempting you because of the fasting.
No. That's why I kept drawing attention earlier to the word perhaps in the ESV. If it's only a maybe, you're not being protected by the prayer, you're being protected by the sex. You can stop to have prayer if you wish, but
I didn't talk about prayer. I was talking about the fasting of sex, not the prayer part.
You did. You said
no, I didn't say anything about prayer.
I think you did.
No, I said fasting of sex.
The fasting of sex, and then the prayer had to do with protecting them from Satan's temptation during the period of prayer.
But that's just it. But that's just it. Okay. What I'm saying is, there's a period of time where you're not having sex, right?
Right.
Okay. During which there may be a time there may come up during that time Satan's temptations, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Small possibility, I'd say, but yeah, it's there.
So would it possibly go to reason then that if you're not in a period of fasting, that temptation that Satan's tempting you wouldn't be an issue during that time? You know, I mean, you're going along and you have sex, let's say every other day.
Right, during that time, and assuming you were having sex directly prior to it, yes. assuming those two things, then yes.
Directly prior to it.
Yes, it says do not deprive each other. That means you're having sex, except
All right,
on a regular schedule. So let's say it's every other day.
We've beaten this verse to death.
Oh yeah, I suppose.
So I something that you said in our chat a few days ago. Sorry to pick on you, Cody. Let's say because Cody has low testosterone.
No, I'm straight up open to go for it.
No, that's cool. That's cool. So let's say his wife has a higher sex drive than him. Who gets to control the frequency?
The biblical principle is that they have sex as often as whoever has the higher sex drive. So the principle that they should be following is that they have sex as often as the wife wants if she has the higher sex drive.
All right. So okay. No, go ahead. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, actually, I think I'm good. Go ahead.
Okay. So according to Ephesians, so again, you're saying that the wife would then control that aspect, correct?
I don't know about that because that sounds a bit like she's assuming authority over her husband. But it is certainly her right to have sex with him. Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, because it does sound like that would, if that were the case, that would directly contradict Ephesians 5, where the wife is supposed to submit herself to her husband. Mm-hmm. So now we're pitting Scripture against Scripture.
I don't think I've pitted it against it. I think my interpretation is consistent. I think you're asking a secondary question of, well, if they come to a difficult point where one of them absolutely does not want sex, and then the other absolutely does, what do they do? I'm happy to answer that question. I just think it's a related but something of a side issue. But
I'm just trying to get a consistent interpretation. So Justin Pierce just joined, and I think he would like to say some things.
Okay.
Let's see, Prince, your name's Matt, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, Matt, my name is Justin. Let me get on the screen here so we can see each other. My name is Justin. I'm just a small town pastor. I'm not really much of anybody, but as I've been listening to this discussion, some questions have come up to me that I want to ask you out of respect. And this is an issue that has brought quite a bit of contention. There's been, some hurt feelings, some anger, and everything else. And I don't think it should be that way.
Okay.
So just to get the premise, because I haven't listened to the entire show, are you married? Is one question I would ask.
I'm not married.
Okay. As delicately as I can ask it, are you involved sexually with anyone else, or have you been? If you don't mind my asking the question, I'm not trying to pry. I'm just trying to come from a perspective.
I'm a virgin. I did have a girlfriend once, and I did a couple things that were obviously sinful and inappropriate. But no, I'm still a virgin to this day.
Well, going to 1 Corinthians 7. Now we're going to all agree, I hope, that this is not the only passage that deals with the marital relationship. But in this marriage relationship, we have to remember the context of 1 Corinthians is that an entire church, an entire body of Christ is coming together in absolutely aberrant, terrible, wicked ways. They were depriving one another of sexual gratification as a husband and wife. They were separating from each other for all types of different purposes. One person become a Christian and say, well, I can't be in relationship with this person because they're not a Christian. And he's trying to answer all of these questions based upon a dealing with pagans who have become Christians, trying to learn how to be Christian. Would you agree with that?
What pagans trying to be Christian? That's a bit of a mixed question to answer. There are some people obviously who weren't Christians, like a man who is technically a member who was having sex with his own mom. Okay. So it's kind of a mixture of the two. I would say obviously.
But my point is that entire group of that entire church body comes from Paul going out into the Corinthian, the town or city of Corinth, and he's going out and proclaiming the gospel, and people come to Christ. and they're bringing their paganism in, they're bringing their false understanding in, and they're trying to balance what is being taught by God versus what they know in all of the life that they've lived. Now, you'll agree with that, correct?
Sure.
Okay, part of their issue that they were having is the Christians were not engaging in their marital partners anymore because of this new understanding of being in Christ. They're supposed to be separate from the world, and that's why he says, when I told you to be separate from the world, I did not altogether mean those outside the world, but those in the body of Christ, those that were living in wickedness and sin. And so in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, he's been asked about the sexual relationship with women, and he says it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. So in other words, he's saying that if you are in the situation where it's okay that you are single, or you are in a divorce situation, or your wife is in a situation where you are not you're not married, it's fine. It's good to continue that way. You don't have to run around looking to get married. So there's the idea here, and follow me if you will. There's the idea here that you yourself could be that very person that Paul just spoke to and said it's okay for you to abstain from sexual relationships, and you have the maturity to be able to abstain and hold yourself from sexual relationships, right? I mean, you do, and so those people there.
Well, no, I think that ignores part of 1 Corinthians 7 itself, because it says...
But we haven't got to that part yet. We're starting up just... This is exegesis. I want to go through the first part first. Now, concerning the matters which I wrote to you about, it is good for a man not to have sexual relationships with a woman. The very first part of this is the predication that every one of the single people can abstain if they are able to.
No, I completely disagree. You're only reading the first verse. I think the other verses
I have not gotten to any other verse yet.
And I think that's right. That I know.
And you're jumping to the next verses. He says, if you are able to, it is good for a man not to have sexual relationships with a woman. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each of you should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. There's a should in here. It's an imperative that says, if you can't abstain, you should go get married. Okay? In other words, okay, and so a moment ago you disagreed, but now you're agreeing. And see, what I'm trying to get you to do is think about exegesis from a verse-by-verse stance right here so that you can break it down. And the reason why this is important is your predication is a married man cannot exercise abstinence in marriage. Okay, and here's the problem. Paul maybe possibly at one time was married, but now for sure in this context, he is single and he is abstinent. Many other people in the scriptures were single men and abstinent. And what I'm trying to say to you is that we're not glandular animals. We can actually control ourselves. It's a part of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Now follow me here. What he's saying is that for those of you who have this sexual temptation, it's okay for you to get married, for husband and wives, and you are correct that it goes on and it says that this is so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. But what you have to realize is there's other passages that are equally as strong in this, and they don't fight against each other. They tell us the purpose of marriage. You see, marriage is not all just about sex. Okay? And as a counselor and as a pastor and as a teacher, as a mentor and as a person who disciples young men, I tell them, my own son who's 20 years old, who has a girlfriend, who has a fiance, I tell him that his purpose in life is not just to go to try to have sex with her, but to raise her up so that at the time that she meets God, he can present her before a holy God, as Ephesians 5 tells us, that we can present her before God and say, this is what I've done with what you've given me. It's an idea of loving communion and loving fellowship. There's There's the idea of raising someone else and sacrificing yourself and giving for another person. And the idea of adultery and pornography and lust and all those things, those are all aberrant behaviors, and they're not to be lauded. Can we agree with that?
You said so many things. I've been trying to let you speak. I can't say I agree with it because you said some things I agree and some things I didn't.
What could I possibly have said that you would disagree with?
First, you asked me if I might not be a person who it would be good to not have sexual relations with a woman. When I try to answer you in light of the other verses that I'm not a person who can resist the temptation to sexual sin, you said, no, hang on, let me go over these verses, and then you went over them. I was going to say, that's why I had a problem with you just starting with verse 1 and then asking me, could you be one of those men? That's why. So you're saying
right now you cannot abstain from sexual immorality.
Not for long. Not for long.
Have you? I don't know how old you are. Let's say 25. Okay. Have you in the 15 years of your youthfulness been sexually immoral, and are you now being sexually immoral at this very moment?
Sexually immoral now, but in the 15 years since I turned 13, no, of course I've been sexually immoral a million times just by my sins of thought alone.
Okay, so what I'm trying to get you to understand is you're telling me that you don't have self-control.
Yes, just like 1 Corinthians 7 verse 5 says, so that Satan won't tempt you because of your lack of self-control. They don't have self-control. It's right there.
Okay, but you're not married. Exactly. Meow.
So
exactly
what?
No. Please don't say so what, because what you're doing is you're belittling the argument. You're belittling. Please listen to me. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to you, but this is so important. And here's the problem. What you're trying to do is you're trying to justify sexual acts and sexual congress between married couples when you don't understand the purpose of marriage is not all about sex. Yes, we're supposed to come together, but I got news for you. I've been married for 20 years, and my wife, I've heard a couple other men here talking about the same thing. My wife has had certain times when she cannot. I've had certain times when I cannot. And that doesn't make her guilty of me running around looking with lust. I'm guilty of that when I do it, and you are guilty of that when you do it. Right this very moment, sir, and I mean this with all due respect, you need to understand that you're trying to justify sexual immorality by saying, well, no man should have to when they're married. They shouldn't ever have to wait. The problem is you're justifying that you don't have to wait now.
Okay.
See what I'm trying to say to you, please.
I want to jump in here. So if you have more to say, I've got to jump in.
You jump in. You jump in.
Okay. The thing is, perhaps you didn't hear this part because you said you didn't hear all of the conversation.
I've only been here about an hour.
You heard about an hour. Okay.
Yeah, I've been about an hour.
Okay. It's been going for a long time now. But the thing is, I kept saying over and over, and every man in this room can testify to this. I didn't try to justify anything. I specifically gone out of my way to deny that I would never say that a man is innocent of sin, of the sin of looking at pornography, for example. Even if he looks at it, he is still guilty of that sin. I said the blame is shared. I made that distinction many, many, many times. And if you go and re-listen to this later, you will hear me say that over and over again. Oh, well then I don't accept your heated exhortation that I'm trying to justify sinful behavior.
But let me ask you a question. You just said that sin is shared.
I said the blame is shared. Yes.
So I can stand before a holy God and say he made me do it. You know, Adam and Eve tried that.
Well,
Adam actually, listen please, just a minute. Adam actually tried that with God. He said, you gave me the woman. He said, she's the one that tempted me to do this sin. Mm-hmm. And now listen, I mean this with all due respect. I need you to understand this. I'm not trying to be mean. I actually care about this passionately because there are so many men who are drawn into sexual immorality because they justify that somebody else made me do it. Okay?
Yeah, well, they're partially right about that.
They are not right. I cannot make you sin. You sin on your own, sir. You're responsible for your own wickedness and your own depravity before a holy God.
I don't disagree with that, but 1 Corinthians 7 says, if you deprive one another, you are vulnerable to temptation from Satan. For a wife to consistently refuse to have sex with her husband, and she cannot say, well, he looked at porn, so he's going to be for his sin. No, she put him in a place to be tempted. That is sinful.
So what you're saying is,
that's what it means.
So what you're saying is
shared.
What you're saying is you are a glandular animal who cannot be held accountable for his own self-control.
I made an argument from Scripture just now. That's what I
did not. What you did is you tried to do is say that this Scripture is an absolute in juxtaposition against passages like this. Walk with your wife in an understanding way. If you'll look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7, it says this: the man should give his wife her conjugal rights, and the wife, the implication is should. The wife, likewise, the wife to her husband. There's a should in there. It's an ought. It's something that on the normal course of events should happen.
Yes.
Okay? But there are always circumstances where we need to walk with our wives in an understanding way. And when I try to justify my sexual sin because my wife didn't meet my needs, I'm missing the gospel. You see, the purpose of marriage is not just for sex. It's for the gospel of Jesus Christ to be lived out. The Bible tells us in Ephesians that the marriage example to the world is as Christ is to the church, who laid down his life for her and gave himself for her. That's what the purpose is supposed to be for. You know, we as husbands, we come to our wives seeing a sinner and making a covenant with another sinner that we're going to try to present them to Christ as a better person that they are, that we're going to try to be the best persons we can be. And we're going to try to love one another, even in sin. It's the idea that God gives us of teaching each other forgiveness and respect and love and grace. And when they fail, we don't just try to justify it and say, well, she should have done this. Well, yeah, but guess what? We have failed Christ so many times. We have failed God so many times that if he held that same position, we'd all burn in hell.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The gospel of Jesus Christ is this, is that we are wicked, vile sinners. We deserve the wrath of a holy God, and God doesn't give us what we deserve, even though we deserve it. As a husband, I look at my wife, and I tell her that, yes, there are things that you should have done, but because I love you, I give myself over not to my rights. If Jesus Christ demanded his rights, we would all be in hell. And he is our perfect example of the perfect husband. Now, okay. Prince, I love you to death. I love your heart. I love your passion. But I think in this case, and I'll shut up and I'll let you say whatever you want to say, but in this case, I really think you need to get under some godly mentorship and discipleship of older men who are married and who are holy and living in that marriage relationship and who've been through that fight. You know, and I don't mean any disrespect. I mean it, please, as respectfully as I can say. To me, the whole respect thing is kind of a moot point. My tongue is tired now because we've been going so long. But just in response to talking about Christ giving himself for the church, Christ imposes mandates upon the church. This church that he died for, he then said, you have to die for me too. Take up your cross and follow me. And when you sin, you have an advocate that you can go to him. And when you fail those mandates, you have an advocate that you can go before him and plead your case with him and say, yes, I'm an abject failure. And that one that made the mandates is also the one that says, and I paid for your failure. And as a husband, I have the responsibility to look at my wife and say, yes, there's all these rules and regulations, but I know that you're going to fail and I'm going to fail. And as an example of Christ, I have the obligation to forgive you, not to hold it over your head and try to look like, well, now I have the right for sexual immorality. Oh, sure. Well, again, no, I would never suggest he ever had a right. This is one of the problems I outlined in one of my videos, is that
this is the reaction that that gentlemen like you and other people have given, is that if you ever suggest the blame is shared, well, inherent within that statement is the indication that the man who's looking at pornography is, albeit he is sinning, it's not quite as high-handed. He's not quite the moral monster he would be if his wife was having sex with him the whole time. So in the situation of you've got, you're counseling a couple, and they come before you, and the wife says, my husband's addicted to pornography. This is causing huge problems in our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
If the husband accepts that he's sinned, he's looking at pornography, of course he's in sin.
Okay.
Isn't it proper? Isn't it fair to also bring up if she is frigid and she is refusing to have sex with him on a consistent basis? It's not a matter of taking, that's not a matter of, wait, I'm almost done. It's not a matter of justifying him. Okay. It's not a matter of justifying his immorality. It's not a matter of saying he's an innocent victim. No. It's a matter of saying, if we're going to solve this problem, if you want me to break this porn addiction, then I need you to have sex with you. You can't keep denying me. And it's perfectly okay to point out that he has biblical justification for that. If the Bible's on his side, that needs to be brought up. That's what I would say. If a pastor, if someone's a pastor and they're like, the husband says she consistently refuses to have sex and that's what's going on, what do I do? 1 Corinthians 7, do not deprive. So part of the counsel should be to the wife, do not deprive. If you're depriving him, you've got to stop it.
Okay, based upon what we're talking about here, it would be right for me to tell, and I've heard this argument just a minute ago, the cancer patient, or in other cases, someone who's had, my wife, in other words, for example, we lost 2 children. Now, I know you don't know about those issues because you haven't experienced that yet, but my wife lost 2 children. I lost 2 children, and 2 of them in childbirth. And for the longest time, we could not come together because of the grief and the pain that was involved in that. Now, if I came to her and were to tell her, wait a minute, I have conjugal rights, am I walking with her in an understanding way?
Yeah, am I because of grief? And you're asking, is that loving of her?
Am I seeking her best good or my own sexual needs?
Well, I think it's in your wife's best interest that you not sin. Let's say you've got a former.
Pause for a minute. Answer this question. Don't jump to a different question. Is it in? I didn't indicate that I was going to go look with lust. I said, is it right I'm married to my wife and I choose not to look at another woman. Okay, and I want to make this clear. What I see you doing is justifying the adultery, the lust of the eyes, and all these things. And what I'm trying to say to you is as a married man, I choose to only look at my wife, even if I don't get to have sexual relationship with her every single day, or once a week or once a month. I would love to be able to and be engaged with her at any moment in time. However, there are times of propriety, and there are times when she can't or I can't. She's exhausted. I'm exhausted. We've got 4 other kids, by the way. We're busy at church and ministry, and we're busy doing all types of other stuff. She's got work. I've got work. We're always doing something. And there are times when it goes quite a while before we can engage in those acts. But you know what? We never miss. We never miss a time to love each other and pray for one another, to care for one another, to nurture each other, and to think best thoughts for each other. I'm always praying for my wife, and I walk with her in an understanding way. But there are many people who say, I didn't get my sexual fix, so I'm okay to look at pornography. They are not thinking of their wives and walking their wives in understanding. What they're doing is they're elevating their own sexual needs above the needs of the gospel, of peace with the family, of a relationship with the family. In the book of Proverbs, it tells us that a wife can destroy her whole entire family, her whole entire home, based upon her wickedness, and that applies to the man just as much to the woman.
Sure.
If I go out and do these things, and what I'm trying to say to you is this: we are not glandular animals, and I resent that anybody would try to justify, well, we have the right, or it's understandable that somebody runs out and looks at pornography or looks with lust. Are you going to justify the very act of adultery or homosexuality or bestiality, or are you going to justify child pornography or even child rape and sex? How can you justify one without justifying all of them?
I wouldn't just. This may be just a problem because this is a new conversation. But I've never, ever justified. I've never said anybody is innocent of the sin. They are not justified. Pointing out that the blame is shared. Pointing out that the blame is shared is not justifying it. And if you say if you pose the question to me, what about a husband and a wife who are going through grieving, and let's say the husband feels like he needs sex, but his wife is still grieving.
Okay.
I agree. That's a tough call to make. But you've got one thing. You've got two things on one end. If you feel if the need is great enough that you feel like you might lust after other women because the temptation is strong, you're starting to lose self-control because you're being deprived. So you feel like maybe you will look at pornography. You may watch something that's not technically pornography. That's just a PG-13 R-rated movie.
Okay.
At that point, you have to choose between the two. And I think it would be. I don't think it's inappropriate to expect a wife to say that if a husband says that he's at the end of his rope and that he's afraid he is going to do those things, that she should try to accommodate him. I think that would be a fair thing for a husband to ask. I don't think it would be selfish for him to ask. And but again, yeah, it's a tough call.
Well, okay, and it is a tough call in some cases. I guess you could say that. I'm struggling though with the focus of the call. Is it based upon, do I have the right to sin? Because you just said just a second ago, does this person sin, get tempted to sin or not? You see, and here's why I'm saying there's an issue here. The reason it shouldn't be a tough call is because Matt, I believe it's Matt. If I'm wrong, please forgive me.
No,
Matt,
you're right.
You told us you're a Christian.
Yes.
I'm telling you, I'm a pastor, a Christian, and a husband. But leaving the husband part out of this for a moment. As a Christian, you are called to flee from lust, to flee from sexual temptation. You're not called to stand up and fight and do your best to just look a little bit. But you're called to avoid that sexual temptation and avoid all of the immorality that we see. When you pump it in your eyes and in your mind and you see it, and I'm not saying you per se, please understand that I'm not just talking about you.
I understand.
But I'm talking about men in general, and I can speak to the women as well, because there's a high percentage of women that are involved in this as well. But when someone involves their mind and their heart in the things of the world of lust and justifying their sexual desires, and they're justifying their passions of the world, and they're trying to say we have the right to do these things because of X, Y, and Z, all they're doing is going back to Adam and Eve, and the same thing that Adam said, she made me do it. Well, the problem is my wife does not make me look at pornography. My wife does not make me lust over other women. I mean, she can deny me sex 24/7, 365 for the rest of my life, and I still don't have the right to violate God's clear commandments to not look upon another woman with lust and not to commit adultery. I have a wife who I should be able to have sexual relationship with on a given occurrence. That doesn't demand that I have always, in every case, the right to either have sex with her or look with lust or commit adultery. I have to choose as a Christian that I will never violate God's standards, and I will always uphold the righteousness of Christ as the gospel witness. Okay? And that's as a husband, as a pastor, and as a man of God. If you're a man of God, you can't say, well, she made me do it. No, she has maybe some responsibility in her sin, but I can't say she made me do it. I can't justify it, and to do so opens the avenue up for men all over the place to say, see, I'm vindicated. And I won't do that. I would never do that.
He's certainly not vindicated, and it's just people seem to jump. Sure, people seem to jump from the idea that he is not quite as sinful as they thought he was, to thinking that, well, we must be vindicating him. I think that's a common mistake. I think maybe it just has to do with feminism in the church, but I labor hard and long to make sure people realize I've never justify a man who looks at porn. He is still sinning. Of course, if a man has a wife who is denying him sex 24/7, 365, I think he should probably get a divorce. I think that's a pretty egregious sin for the wife to commit, and then he should find another wife to marry.
Well, but before we say that, though, you might have a biblical basis for that. However, the Bible doesn't give us, well, you go ahead and get a divorce if you don't like the situation. Actually, we're called to forgive. And 1 Corinthians chapter 7 tells us this, that if we can forgive as a gospel witness, then we can do that. There are plenty of circumstances where we see that people who forgive the adulterer, the adulteress, and continue on. The Old Testament, somebody help me, I've already forgotten the guy's name. Mary's the Mercy.
Here's Gomer.
Gomer, yeah. I mean, he married Gomer, guys.
Yes, that's right. Yes, Gomer.
Oh man, who did that? I can't think of the.
See,
Hosea.
Hosea. Yeah, Hosea.
But think about that. But was he not the perfect example of how God pursues us in our wickedness? And do we not see the example that it is actually biblical? Because we have said biblical, it's in the Bible. It's actually biblical that we forgive others even when they mistreat us and do these bad things to us. I mean, we can see that. I don't know if this is actually going to post or not. Ephesians chapter 5 tells us about husbands and wives, and we know this. But I think so many times we start with the wrong passage. Everybody starts that I know of, he starts with Ephesians 5, verse 22. Mm-hmm. Okay? Go to 21.
Okay.
Because there's actually no verb in 22.
Let's see. I've got it in this document here. Ephesians 5. Oh, 22. Okay. Now I'm going to have to open up my web browser because I don't have 21.
Yeah, there you go. And see, everybody knows 22. But go to 21.
Ephesians 5. I love Bible Gateway. Let's see here. Ephesians 5.
I posted it on the side for
my computer's not so great. Submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Yes.
See, the whole point is we submit to one another, but we submit to one another in Christ. Right? Okay. Mm-hmm. He says he's going to end in a minute. So, but we submit to one another in Christ. It's the idea of, I know my role, my wife knows her role, and in Christ we submit to one another, even if she fails and even if I fail. We're submitting to Christ first, okay? Paul Washer actually talks about the triangle, the marriage triangle. Have you ever heard of that?
I've listened to some. I don't think I recall that particular thing, no.
Okay, you have the husband on one side, the wife on the other side. As they grow closer to God, they go closer to each other. As they submit to Christ more, they submit to one another more. That's in the perfect relationship. That's in the perfect analogy, what you see in 1 Corinthians, what you see in Ephesians. That's the perfect calling, the highest calling for marriage, okay? But when we fail, as a husband, man, I fail all the time, okay? But that doesn't give my wife right to say, well, you failed. You didn't live up to your perfect expectations. And since you didn't live up to the perfect thing, I can go look at Tom Cruise.
Oh, sure, of course. That's why I think the exception, that the only reason for the only thing that might justify a divorce, a Christian divorcing their spouse, would be some really egregious sin like infidelity, like a man sleeping with another woman or something like that.
Well, actually, according to Ephesians, 1 Corinthians, ongoing unrepentant sin is allowable. Ongoing unrepentant sin, abandonment of that form, and death.
In 1 Corinthians 7?
In 1 Corinthians 7, if you keep looking at this, it talks about, to the unmarried and the widows, I say to you that, let's see, to the married, I've got to get to it.
it is good for them to remain single as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control,
verse 12. Yeah. Well, let's go to verse 12. Okay. For the rest, I say, I, not the Lord. This is Paul giving his apostolic authority. That if any brother who has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and consents to live with her, they should not divorce. In other words, you can stay married. For an unbelieving husband is made holy. In other words, here's the whole point. If they consent to stay with you, if they consent to be with you, that's a biblical truth, and it's okay. In other words, they're going to walk in an understanding way. Somebody's drumming over there. Jimmy is. Okay, but you think about this. There's also the concept that if they will not stay with you and they do leave you, you are free from that marriage. I'm actually going to have to find this passage now that you've asked me about it. Let's see. Now it's a concession of command to say to you that I wish that all were on myself. Let's see. Okay, verse 15. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such case, the brother or sister is not enslaved. In other words, you are not under the marriage covenant if they leave and they separate. That's what I'm trying to say to you. There are the biblical parameters for divorce, and it's okay if that happens to happen. But the whole point is it's not something you caused. It's something that the other person did as an unbeliever. You see what I'm saying? They're the ones that walked out and abandoned the relationship. But as a husband, as a faithful godly man or a faithful wife, what you're seeing here is the concept that God has a standard for marriage, and it's not just go have sex, have it as much as you can, and do it as often as possible. It's if you can be in that union, fine. But if not, walk in understanding. There's adult stuff you might not understand. There's this concept. I'm sorry, I'm reading the side chat.
It's okay. It's okay.
But there's the concept of marriage here that says that yes, we when we first come together, there's this heated love and passion for one another, and that passion over time, it may change. There might be the idea of, yes, there's some passion, but there's more compassion. There's more drive and a desire to see others brought to a greater understanding of the Word of God, that our families, our wives, our husbands brought to know Scripture better. And discipleship and mentoring is seen more and more as we grow closer and closer together. And it's not just a sexual or an intimate thing that starts us out. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's the only thing that would add to that is that's what makes the decision so difficult about whether you have grounds for divorce or something, because if you are being deprived constantly and you're vulnerable to temptation from Satan, I mean, what's the call to make? There's the command to stay with it, to try and be a gospel presence, but if you're looking at porn, if you're failing to resist temptation and you're looking at porn, well, that's not a very good gospel witness. So that would be a tough call to make in that situation.
Well, now I'll agree with that, but the whole question that was started out with is what was the premise here? Is the husband the only one to blame for his for pornography? And the issue is, yes, a husband, yes, a man, yes, a wife, yes, a woman is responsible for their own adulterous heart and their own desires. My wife cannot force me to look with lust any more than I can force her to do it. Now, she might be responsible for failing in her parts of the marriage union and everything else, but that doesn't give me any avenue or any right to say, well, she made me do it, or the devil made me do it, or whatever else. I have to own my own sin. And what I'd have to do, let me before anybody says I'm trying to hold on to it, I have to repent. I have to believe in Jesus Christ, and I have to repent of my sin. Amen?
Amen.
No. I'm gonna shut up. I don't want to overtake the whole thing, but I just wanted to point those things out. And I actually did a lot of sermons on this because I had so many people coming to me in divorce situations and situations where families were dying, where their husband was dead or wife was dead, or when there was these situations where there was 30 or 40 young men are asking, hey, what am I supposed to do about this passion that I have for women? Okay.
Right.
And we have to talk about it. It's good to talk about it. Brother, I strongly suggest if you do not have someone, that you grab a hold of somebody that is strong in the Word, strong in the Lord, and that's able to mentor you through these things, because you're asking good questions, but they need to be focused and directed towards your purpose as a potential husband one day. And let me say this one thing, and I'll shut up. Let me say this one thing, and I'll shut up, and I'll never speak again about on this moment.
Don't make something you can't keep, man.
I said on this moment, at this moment. Let me say
Let your yes be yes and your no be no, right?
There you go. What I want to say to you, Matt, and everybody else, is your purpose as a husband, when you become one, is not for your own self-gratification. You have to understand the higher calling. Now think about this. You have the responsibility to present your wife to Christ one day, that you've discipled her. Go read Ephesians 5. That you've mentored her, that you've brought her up and you've raised her up as Christ does the church, that you can bring her and say, this is what I have done as a godly husband, as a man of God, as a pastor or a minister, as an elder, as a teacher, all of those things, but most importantly, as a husband. I have brought her up the best I can and tried to give her a spiritual understanding, a discernment, and a doctrinal understanding of who Christ is, because I want her to know God better than she did when I first met her. You see what I'm saying? When you first meet that girl, you look at her and you love her and you care about her because of her physical attributes. But when you start to get to know her, you realize you have a responsibility towards her heart and towards her spirit. And that's what God expects every godly man who's going to be a husband to do. Okay? So that's all I can give you, and I hope that helps.
I'll let you, I won't respond to what you said. I'll let you have the last word in the banter back and forth between you and me. There's somebody else who said they had one question or something yet left.
Yeah, actually, we have a special guest of Befuddled, and she's actually quite a unique character. She's agnostic, I believe, is what it is, and so I guess she wants to go ahead and ask a question about something.
Okay.
Just a quick thing there. So go ahead.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, I will. No, you made me all like nervous because I'm like a special guest. No, I thought you were. I heard because I dropped off for about 15 minutes, so you may have already covered this, but someone was saying, were you guys considering it? I guess who it was just talking. Was
it me or the other guy?
The other guy.
Justin.
Okay, I think it was when Justin was talking. Well, it was in the interchange that you guys are having. Do you consider looking at pornography being like meeting the requirement for adultery, that would be that if a husband looked at pornography, that would be enough justification for a wife to divorce him? Is that what you were kind of going with, or when somebody was, or no?
I think Justin may have stepped out, or if he is,
he promised that he was not going to say anymore.
Oh, that's
no, I'm kidding.
Well, I mean, some people have said.
Justin, that question was for you.
Justin, you still there?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I was out, man. She brought me back in. Okay, so give me your question.
I think it might have been you you're talking about adultery or looking at pornography, and that in your opinion, does that meet the requirement of like the adultery part that would justify someone getting divorced? I guess that's what I was asking. You know, if the verse says that the only reason to get divorced, that it's accepted, is adultery, does looking at pornography meet that?
Let me say it this way. According to what I see in the scriptures, it can. And what I mean by that is an unrepentant, ongoing, unrepentant lifestyle of sexual immorality. The scripture tells us to flee sexual immorality. Now, a person, male or female, who is looking at a person with lust, they happen to be at a, wherever you want to call it, McDonald's, whatever else, and they see this good-looking guy or girl, and they go, wow, that person is really pretty. You know, and then they continue on, you know, and they continue on with the idea and the thought, and then they go, oh, wait, oh, Lord, I'm so sorry, please forgive me, I shouldn't have done that. They feel a conviction of sin, and they know they shouldn't have done that. Is that adultery of the heart? Yes. Have they repented of it? Have they been convicted? Yes. I mean, the scripture says to look with a woman with lust is adultery of the heart, right? Look, and so we can say to look at a man or a woman with lust is adultery of the heart. So the Bible would say, that would tell us that we are to flee from sexual immorality of every type. For the person who refuses to flee from sexual immorality, I'm going to say, I'm going to have a hard time saying that a person who refuses to flee from sexual immorality and who lives in sexual sin, if that's their desire and that's the bent they have in life, are they even a Christian? You know, I mean, okay, and I mean, and I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, but as a Christian, I'm going to feel conviction when I look with lust, or I look at pornography, or I look at things that I shouldn't look at. And as a Christian, I don't want to do those things. It's not my heart's desire to do that, right? It's not what, because God's given me a new heart with a new conscience. So now I'm not telling you that if John or Jill has looked at pornography, you know, several times and have been caught and they've been involved with pornography, that is justification for divorce. Perhaps that person is a young Christian, a young believer, and hasn't had discipleship and mentoring, and they haven't had anybody to help them along. I mean, don't ever belittle the idea of having a strong godly mentor in your life to tell you you're wrong. So always remember that we need to have godly discipleship and godly ministers that will mentors, let's say, that will come along and help us to grow in holiness and in godliness. We're actually called to stir one another up to love and good works and things like that.
So I guess that, so then it's kind of that you're saying that the justification for divorce in terms of, I guess in God's eyes, if it was something that was accepted, that's kind of open to interpretation depending on the situation. It's kind of,
I would have to say what you need to have, first of all, is a godly mentor and minister in that situation, and preferably a strong godly pastor. I would definitely say someone that is well versed in the ability to counsel and is able to give you strong advice, proven advice on what would qualify in each situation. You know, there are people that you know, they fight with all they can. You know, when I first started my Christian walk, I had a problem with cussing. Okay, I used to be a police officer, and I'll just give it to you like this. I used to be a police officer, and now I know most police officers, a lot of police officers, they don't have the mouth that I used to have. But I mean, I was raised around sailors, and we knew how to cuss like sailors and say everything you could possibly say. And it took me forever. I actually had a sergeant looked at me one time and said, I thought you told me you were a Christian. And I said, well, yeah. And I got offended. I said, why would you say that? He says, you cuss more than anybody else I've ever seen. And it broke me so bad that I actually started crying as a police officer in the middle of a jail cell booking station where we had just arrested a guy. I was crying because I'm a Christian.
Right.
And that's the moment I decided I am going to curb my tongue. And I started looking into what the scripture said about the tongue. You know, sometimes it takes those moments when a new believer or a young believer in Christ is so confronted and convicted by the weight of the sin they didn't realize they were actually involved with, for them to come to that breaking moment where the Holy Spirit works in them on that situation. So be very careful. Don't hear me say that, you know, I don't know what your situation is, but be very careful. Okay. I'm just saying, for anybody that hears this, never hear me say that you should run out and get divorced. I think divorce is the very last thing you should ever do in a marriage. It should be something that should be the farthest thing from your mind, save abuse, abandonment, death, or what else is there? Ongoing unrepentant sexual sin.
Well, I think death kind of gives itself, but
yeah,
I think I agree with 99% of what you said there, Justin. That was yeah, it certainly can. Yeah. So.
Can everybody remember that Matt and I have 99% agreement on this? Okay. No, I'm just
I've got it written down.
I would like to discuss what the 1% disagreement would be.
Well, see, here's the thing. It's ground we've already gone over, I think, and we've been going for a really long time. And at some point, somebody's got to say, "I've made my case." We got to either let somebody else speak, bring something new.
Well,
I've actually got something that.
I'm going to jump out real quick, but here's what I'm going to do. B, thank you for asking me the question. I hope I helped and answered the question. Guys, if you want to find me on Facebook and you want to talk about this anymore or whatnot, I'm in and out on Facebook. I'd love to talk to you. Matt, it was a great conversation, and thank you all for letting me come on.
Actually, Justin, before you head out, I've got a question that hopefully might be pretty quick.
Okay.
But, this could be for anybody in here, because it's something I'm not married, ever been married, still virgin, so no sexual contact and all that stuff. So the question I have is, have you ever discipled anyone or had contact with anyone who, in a Christian marriage, became sexually addicted to their partner? Is that something that you think could be possible if you haven't run into that?
Well, I imagine
depends on how you define addiction, I guess.
I guess it could be possible. I've never heard of that. Here's one thing that I think where you're going. Are you speaking in the terms of possibly the man that says something like, "Oh, I couldn't rape my wife because we're married"? Type?
No. I'm more talking about it's almost like sex between a husband and a wife is a gift of God. Mm-hmm. Any gift of God can be twisted by the enemy.
I agree with that.
For instance, a man starts to, almost like going to anything that you should be going to God for.
Like creating an idol out of it, basically.
Yeah, essentially, make an idol out of it to the point where it's like, well, I don't. It's almost like the need versus want thing, where it's like, I want this, but I don't really need it, but I'm going to take it because I can. That type of thing, where they become addicted to it to that point, where it almost does become a need, but not something that's natural, I guess, or something. Or, healthy.
Wouldn't it be a matter of like if they're using it in place of, in your opinion, I would in place of when they should be going to God for something, and they're using that as their, coping mechanism, which is kind of what addiction is using something that could possibly be healthy, but then they're overusing it. And
here's where I'm going to answer both of those questions in agreement, the possibility of it. And the reason I say I think there's a possibility of it is because I think in marriage, a lot of times we forget that marriage was never meant to be a substitute for God or Jesus Christ. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's always meant to take a position of, this is let's say a placating relationship, not a substituting relationship. I have a union with a person that I love in this world, but as you said, it can be twisted and perverted into a lust or a aberrant passion and type things like that. And I'm going to agree. I think it possibly could be. But I think the reason that we get into adultery and pornography and And even lust for idolatry, I guess, of our own wives or husbands might have a large factor in, I won't say might, I think it actually does have a large factor in that we've gotten our eyes off of Christ, who should be our absolute fulfillment, and our fulfillment in our sexual partner. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
We also have a special guest that came in just a little bit ago. Dustin Germain is here. Such an honor.
Hey guys, how's it going? Hey, I have a quick question for Matt. Actually, 2 questions for Matt.
Okay, time's up. No.
And with that, we're going to end. No, I'm kidding.
No.
Go ahead.
Hey, so kind of, Matt was kind of talking about how the whole idea of, whoever has a higher sex drive, like let's say a husband wants to have sex 6 times a day, for example. If that kind of high sex drive would exhaust the wife or cause her pain, or even distress her, does she still have to comply with him, or what is his response to, let's say, a super high sex drive, which is incompatible with hers?
If 6 times a day, I mean, the people who want that generally tend to be people like me who don't get any sex at all. So I imagine if you did have sex 6 times in a single day, let's say you had some vacation time or something, have sex 6 times in a single day. I think by the time the next day came around, you might want sex once, maybe twice. I think if a wife did agree to do that, his need would be met. And so if they didn't have sex 6 times the next day, it wouldn't be a matter of not meeting his needs.
Okay,
So,
but let's say he did have legit sex drive 6 times a day, and she was being exhausted and kind of causing her pain and distress. What is his response to that?
I think his response is that he needs
does he have to curb his own appetite? Would he have to curb his own appetite and say, listen?
I don't think he has an appetite. I think he might have some kind of mental problem, some serious derangement or something like that. I think he needs to consider seeking professional mental health.
Well, who decides how much is too much sex? And if it's in the approved way, 6 is a number that you decided that's way too much, or I don't know.
Good question.
Who decides? Well,
yeah, how do you? Where's the threshold? If they're doing it in the healthy, non-sinful way, then how are you going to say that that? I mean, I think he's kind of pointing that out. It's what do you do when you have
it's a healthy way. Well, he was asking about an unhealthy context where you're driving your wife to exhaustion and stuff like that. In a healthy context, there is no limit to how much sex
but I mean, it sounded like you said if somebody wants to do it 6 times a day, then that's unhealthy already. But I'm asking, is that, what if they both wanted to do it 6 times a day?
If they both wanted to do it 6 times, well, see, at that point they would never leave the house. So, I mean, that they may want to do that, but they don't need to have sex 6 times a day. And I think the fact that there are people that do like having sex that get married, they don't really have sex 6 times a day. Eventually, your appetite gets satisfied, so you only have sex once or twice. Let's say a husband's gone for a week. Let's say he's fighting a porn addiction and he goes for a week without sex. And then at the end of that week, he says, honey, I'm taking a day off from work. Let's send the kids over to one of my friends' houses. We're going to have sex all day long. And it's 6, 7, 8 times that day. That seems perfectly fine to me. 8 times every single day, that's a different issue.
Okay, another quick question. So let's say the woman, she has a medical issue that she develops where sex would be extremely painful to the point of impossibility. Let's say she has vaginismus, where sex is so painful it hurts to hell, and she cannot have it for many months at a time, even a year or 2. What would the husband's response be to that?
His response should be that he should. I hate to use the term implore because that sounds like begging and that sounds unmasculine. His response should be to seek to gain sexual satisfaction from his wife in whatever way he can. Any porn addict knows there's plenty of things besides normal sexual intercourse that a wife can do to please her man. So that's what the husband should do. He should resort to whatever. The husband should resort to whatever avenue of sexual gratification he can with his wife if normal sexual intercourse is off the table.
So, quick question:
if she's incapacitated to the place that she couldn't do anything, then I mean, how far would you take that? He's just going to have to figure out a way to do it.
you got to figure something out. You've got temptation knocking on the door. You've got to figure something out. So,
hey,
So
quick question.
I didn't. All right, go ahead.
You go on.
I was just going to ask if Matt, is that your name?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know if you considered masturbation itself a sin. I mean, if theoretically, if you could do that without lusting, which I think is kind of impossible, but is that in itself it's a sin?
I guess you can masturbate without lusting, but they go hand in hand so much that
that was kind of what we were told, that it's okay if you can do it without thinking about anything, which is like, how does that work? I don't know, but theoretically, I don't know if masturbation itself is to you sinful.
I don't think it is necessarily, but then again, that's well, hey, actually, in the context of a husband, let's say you've got a husband who's a soldier and he gets deployed overseas, but he's married. If he wanted to masturbate while thinking about his wife, I think that's perfectly acceptable.
So
he's
it could
thinking
be
about his
acceptable
wife.
for a husband to masturbate, or like someone
Yeah,
who's
it
married to do it because they could think of their partner, and that would not be, yeah. And Jimmy had wanted to ask a question, so I don't want to keep monopolize the rest of the time. So go ahead, Jimmy.
I appreciate that. Yeah, my question is, I think it's the principle of what Dustin's actually asking, which is, what is your scriptural criterion to differentiate between desire and need, right? Because if Ephesians is telling us that we're to love our wives as ourselves, and the wife makes certain demands like, okay, well, I need quality time. I need you to sit down and bond with me here and just spend time with me. I need a date day a week. I need you to spend a day with me. If she's making these demands, just as a parallel example with the husband, what's your scriptural standard to say, well, the wife doesn't actually need those. Those are just desires. And the same thing for the man. He actually needs sex, once a day, twice a day, 3 times a week. Like, what's the standard there for him?
The Bible doesn't give us a particular standard for how many times is what constitutes a need. I think a couple, a man and a woman, are perfectly capable of feeling within their own biology however often a man gets aroused, how desperate he can become when he goes without. It kind of depends on from person to person, and so we'd have to but again, the Bible doesn't give specifics in that regard. It just gives us general principles. Don't deprive. And if someone says they're deprived, well, that needs to be addressed. If you want to debate whether he says he's being deprived, but he actually gets enough sex, that's a debate that could be had, but that would depend on the individual man or woman.
Well, don't you think? Well, I think what's being pointed out is that when you say it has to be, it depends. Then how do you know that if someone says they need it or they're being deprived, then how are you going to determine that if that's true or not, if you don't have something to standard to measure it from?
Can
I qualify real quick?
No, go ahead, do a follow-up.
Okay, so the follow-up is, well, okay, given that it's to be decided on an individual basis, how then can you make a generalized claim about a statistic like pornography and say, in general, this is because of the frigidity of women, if it's to be decided on an individual basis?
Well, I would answer that by saying that part of the things that we've mentioned in this hangout is a video that I made on the topic of pornography, and I was talking about the reason Christian men suffer from porn addictions. That was the context in which I was talking about it. And so I would not say that in general porn addictions are due to purely unsinful reasons, because most men are unsaved. And so they the reason they fall into porn is because, well, they're sinful. So I would not say that it's only because of frigid wives that men ever look at porn, but I would blame the continuation of it on a woman, assuming that she was refusing to have sex with her husband as he was trying to break his addiction.
I didn't ever hear that part of the discussion. That's interesting. Okay.
See, I have to disagree, because I think a man that struggled with a porn addiction that's a Christian, if he is repentant of that, then the fruits of that repentance is going to be not having himself have access to pornography or any means to be able to get it, whether it's monitoring devices, accountability software, accountability partners. I would greatly doubt their repentance in that respect if
Oh,
those
sure.
things weren't implied. So to be they would from continuing to be able to partake in that sin.
Oh, sure, and I agree, but I wouldn't say that that a porn filter is a solution. I'd say that obviously I know you guys disagree, but I was saying the sex is the solution. I would certainly advocate the use of a porn filter in the context where it's a given that the wife is going to have sex with her porn-addicted husband, however much that he wants. The porn filter is more like a stopgap type of a thing, because inevitably you can find ways around porn filters. You can buy a new phone, you can uninstall it, you can do a factory reset on your
right. But I'm saying a man that's repentant is going to implement all of those things to keep himself from doing that, whether that's going to a flip phone or whether that, regardless of the cost, because you know, the wife having sex with her husband more often is not going to fix the porn problem. Because again, the root of a pornography addiction is not driven by desire. It's a totally different thing. Yeah, and that's wrong, because logically the conclusion is if wife has sex with me, this man won't struggle with pornography, and that's a lie, and that enslaves men. And I'm passionate about it because I was one of them, and that does not fix the pornography addiction problem.
I think that also unfairly puts the burden onto the women. It's like it's saying that it's her fault that within these scenarios that were kind of brought up where there's a legitimate reason that a woman would not be having sex with her partner. I mean, and then it just being that, like, I don't know. I feel like there's a it's repeatedly put on women that it's their responsibility for making sure that guys don't sexually sin. That was the way it was in the church that I grew up, and it's still in a lot of situations how it's talked about.
The reason why I loved Dustin's question. It's the same one that I had last week, Matt, when we were talking. But I'm just getting at the principle of the matter. And my motivation is, well, I see a double standard both ways. On the one hand, I see that we have a society that I think Matt was absolutely right, that there are women at fault who are frigid. They deprive their men. They don't take care of them. I think that is frankly true. You know what, though? It's also the other way around. There are men who don't care about their wives. They don't sit down and talk with them. They don't have date night. They don't bond with them. They just treat them like the kitchen cleaning and sex machine that they come home to, right? It's a double standard both ways.
And it also does, as even though it's not talked about as much, it does go the other way where the husband is not interested in sex as much. And then that's like a double screws with your head, because females are told basically their entire lives that they're supposed to not be the ones that are, you know.
We actually mentioned that earlier, yeah.
How about this, to make it worse? To make it worse.
I think there's also a presupposition that these that these men didn't bring this addiction into the into the marriage.
Like they had never struggled with it before, so this has to be.
No. There hasn't been any presupposition like that. Not on that particular point. That they bring it in.
Pornography is not even a totally masculine thing. There are plenty of women who have had porn addictions, and there are plenty of marriages, like you just pointed out, where it's actually the man involved depriving. But that was the motivation of my question, which is, I see a double standard here, because on the one hand, we're saying, okay, there's a problem where on a case-by-case basis, the individuals need to figure out what their needs are versus what their desires are. And obviously they need to make leeway for each other. But instead of that, we're saying there's an individual case basis, but we're just going to generalize that overall within Christian marriages, it's the women's fault. What?
Right. Yeah. I would say, I mean, I don't know if anyone's honest, I don't know that there is any person that becomes an adult in our society that has not looked at pornography at some point. Obviously, it's usually males have more exposure to it, and that tends to be more accepted for males, especially in adolescence. But I don't know that you're going to have any guy that has not, gets married and hasn't at least looked at porn a couple times. I mean, I think that's kind of unrealistic to say that there's going to be somebody. So how could it be that it would be the woman's fault if it's already been something that he's dealt with?
Well, sure. Yeah. It's not her fault for the inception of the addiction. If he brought that into the marriage, then yeah, that's his fault alone, and she doesn't shoulder any of the blame. And we went over this with Colleen, excuse me, and a couple other people, that it's a matter of like the continuation of the addiction. If the woman is not, and sorry if this is repeating, you guys can cut me off if we need to stop, but that if the wife is not willing to have sex as often as he needs to have his needs met, then that is what you're saying, that's her depriving him. Was that what your argument was? Yes.
Wow. All right.
Well, I think it's worth noting that when you talk about a woman that's frigid, and especially in Christian circles, very small percentage of them have anything to do with them just being a rebellious wife that doesn't want to do it. It always has to do with some type of sexual abuse in the past, or some type of relational abuse, or generally shame surrounding sex, and those problems will permeate all aspects of the relationship. So I mean, ultimately, that has to be dealt with straight up.
Right, that should be an issue that is raised prior to the marriage.
So
just like the man's porn.
True, but this in the real world that doesn't necessarily.
A lot of that stuff you don't realize.
Ideally,
we got to end this live hangout.
We got to wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's time to end the live. We appreciate everyone, but we got to end this live.
I got to tell you, all this talk about sex is getting me tired. I'm done.
Hey, I'd like to address I'd like to address the council just for like 30 seconds or something. Just wanted to say thank you very much to all of you guys for having me on. This is the first time I've ever been able to get somebody to host a conversation like this. And, the conversation got really heated at certain points, but I think that's necessary. It has to happen. And so I appreciate everybody being patient, for sticking through 3.5, 4 hours, however long we've been going, and for being willing to have me on. You're the first guys who have, and I really do appreciate it. And I think this is going to benefit a lot of people. So I just want to say thank you very much. And that's pretty much it.
Okay, thanks. This is John Wilkson for the Council Google Plus. It's no longer in session. Broadcasting from FEMA Region 10. I am out. I'm done. I'm tired. So take care. God bless. And we will continue discussion off air. And maybe I'll even pass out the link. I don't know. But anyways, thank you very much for everyone who showed up. Colleen, Dustin Jermaine, everyone showed
Justin
up.
Pierce.
So, Justin Pierce. Pastor Justin Pierce, thank you so much for showing up.
Matt Yester.
Show around. You're awesome. Matt Yester, definitely was helpfing. Yeah. So,
yeah,
okay.
me too.
Also,
forget you, B.
Whatever.
Okay. Good night. God bless. Take care.